Imagine this. A fleet of dragon-prowed ships bursts from the fog-shrouded fjords of Scandinavia, their sails billowing like the wings of ravens, carrying warriors whose names echo through eternity. At their helm stands a king forged in iron, Bjorn Ironside, son of legend, driven by a hunger for glory that could topple empires. His target? The fabled heart of the world, Rome itself. But in a twist of fate sharper than any axe, this Viking's audacious gamble would bring him to the gates of eternity and leave him raging at a cruel deception. This is the saga of the man who nearly sacked the eternal city and changed the course of history forever, the cold bite of the north. Sea wind whipped across the decks of 62 longships as they sliced through the gray waters in the summer of 859. Bjorn Ironside, tall and broad-shouldered, his beard braided with silver rings that caught the faint sunlight like stars in a storm, stood at the prow of his flagship. His eyes, sharp as flint, scanned the horizon not for whales or walrus herds, but for the distant shores of legend. He was no mere raider. He was a king in waiting, the eldest son of Ragnar Lothbrok, the man whose name alone sent shivers through the courts of kings. Ragnar, that cunning fox of the seas, had already bloodied the streets of Paris, forcing the Franks to their knees with tribute and terror. Now Bjorn dreamed bigger. Why settle for the gold of Frankish monasteries when the riches of Rome, the city of emperors, gods, and endless plunder, lay waiting like a ripe apple in the sun? Whispers from captured monks and traders had painted pictures in his mind. Marble palaces gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, vaults stuffed with treasures from conquered worlds, churches heavy with relics that could ransom souls or sell for fortunes. Rome wasn't just a city, it was the ghost of an empire, still haunting Europe with its faded glory, a prize that would etch Bjorn's name into the sagas for generations. But who was this Bjorn, this ironclad prince of the north? Born around 855 in the shadowed halls of a Swedish longhouse, where the air smelled of smoked fish and oiled leather, Bjorn grew up in a world where survival meant swinging an axe before dawn. The Vikings, those seafaring Norsemen from Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, were no strangers to violence. From the late 8th century onward, they had erupted across Europe like a plague of locusts, their longships beaching on shores from the icy coasts of Ireland to the sun-baked rivers of Russia. These were men and women, for the sagas tell of shield maidens like Lagertha, Ragnar's fierce wife, who worshipped Thor's thunder and Odin's wisdom, who carved runes into whalebone to ward off evil, and who measured a man's worth not by gold but by the stories his deeds would spawn. Bjorn's childhood was a forge, training with blunt swords on the pebbled beaches of upland, listening to skalds recite tales of Beowulf's monsters and Sigurd's dragon-slaying, watching his father Ragnar vanish on voyages that returned with chests of silver and slaves in chains. By his teens, Bjorn had earned his nickname, Ironside, for a body that seemed impervious to blade or blow, a resilience born of battles against Saxon warlords and rival jarls. When Ragnar vanished, some say captured and thrown into a snake pit by the English King Aelle, Bjorn swore vengeance. But first, he would claim his own thunder. The expedition began not as a conquest of Rome, but as a grand circumnavigation of the known world, a Viking version of Alexander's March. Bjorn allied with Halfdan, a sly chieftain from the Danish marches, known for his silver tongue and sharper tricks. Halfdan was no brute. He was a chess master on water, the kind of man who could talk his way past guards or burn a bridge before the enemy crossed it. Together they gathered warriors from across the Norse lands, berserkers foaming at the mouth in Odin rage, archers with bows of yew that sang death from afar, and smiths who mended shields mid-battle. The fleet pushed south from the Loire River in Francia, where Viking bases dotted the landscape like warts on a hag's face. They hugged the coasts of what is now Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, a patchwork of Christian kingdoms and Muslim emirates, locked in their own endless reconquista. The Vikings cared little for such squabbles. To them, all Southerners were ripe for the picking, their faiths mere excuses for hoarding wealth. Their first taste of Mediterranean blood came at Algeciras, a bustling port under Muslim control. As the longships ghosted into the harbor under cover of night, the Vikings struck like wolves on a flock. Torches arced through the air, igniting the great mosque, a blaze that lit the sky orange and filled the water with screams. They hauled away silks, spices, and slaves, the air thick with the scent of burning myrrh. But glory came with thorns. Further south at Niebla, the forces of the Umayyad Emirate ambushed them, arrows raining like hail, forcing the Vikings to flee with half their provisions lost. Undeterred, they pressed on, sacking the Balearic Islands, those jewel-like dots in the sea where olive groves clung to cliffs, and wintering on the marshy Camargue, a desolate spit of land at the Rhone's mouth. There, amid the cries of flamingos and the chill winds off the Alps, Bjorn gathered his chieftains around roaring fires. Maps scratched on birch bark showed Rome as a glittering prize, but the true path was a riddle wrapped in fog. The Norseman's world knowledge was patchwork, tales from Irish monks of seven-hilled wonders, fragments from Byzantine traders of aqueducts that fed 1 million souls. In their minds, Rome loomed eternal, untouched by the barbarian hordes who had toppled its western half 4 centuries earlier. Little did they know, the city they sought was a shadow of its former self. Ruled by popes and patricians, its legions long dissolved into memory. Spring thawed the rivers, and the fleet surged eastward into the Ligurian Sea. They fell upon Pisa first, that Tuscan jewel with its leaning tower yet to lean, its shipyards choked with galleys. The Vikings swarmed the walls, axes biting into stone and flesh alike, dragging priests from altars and merchants from their counting houses. Gold chalices, ivory crucifixes, bolts of dyed cloth, all piled high on the decks as the city burned behind them. Emboldened, they rode north along the coast, the air growing warmer, laced with the salt of pine forests and the distant tang of wine. Whispers among the oarsmen spoke of Rome just beyond the next headland, its gates flung wide for the taking. But navigation in those days was no science. It was stars and seabirds' dead reckoning and divine whim. A storm had scattered their scouts, and rumors from captured fishermen painted Luna, ancient Luni, the Etruscan port at the mouth of the Magra River, as the glittering capital itself. To the Vikings, with their blurred maps and burning ambition, it fit. White marble walls rising from the haze, a cathedral spire piercing the sky like a spear, markets buzzing with the wealth of empires past. Luna, once a Roman colony named for the moon goddess, had fallen on hard times. Its trade eclipsed by rivals, but to northern eyes, it shone like Valhalla's gates as the longships beached on the pebbled shore. Crunching like bones underfoot, Bjorn surveyed the scene from a rocky outcrop. The city huddled against the hills, its walls cracked but defiant, guarded by a militia of local levies more farmer than fighter. Horns blared from the ramparts, but the Vikings numbered in the thousands, their shields locked in a gleaming boar-snout formation that had broken Frankish phalanxes. A direct assault would bleed them dry, arrows from those towers, boiling oil from the gates. No, Bjorn needed cunning, the kind his father Ragnar had wielded like a dagger. He turned to Hastein, whose eyes gleamed with the spark of mischief. "We take it from within," the Dane murmured, his voice low as a conspirator's prayer. "Let them open their arms to death disguised as a friend." The ploy unfolded at dusk as the sun bled red into the sea. Hastein, pale and drawn from a feigned fever, was borne on a litter toward the gates, flanked by 50 warriors shrouded in monks' robes looted from Pisa. They carried a bier draped in white linen, upon which lay what appeared to be Hastein's corpse, wrapped in burial cloths, his face powdered with ash to mimic the pallor of the grave. Behind them trailed a procession, women keening in mock grief, children scattering herbs for the gods, all actors in this theater of deceit. At the gates, Hastein stirred weakly, croaking through a veil of cloth to the bishop's emissaries. "I am Hastein, once a scourge of the seas," he rasped in broken Latin learned from Frankish captives. "The All-Father has turned my heart to Christ in my final hours. I seek absolution, the holy sacraments, and a Christian tomb within your sacred church. Let me die in grace, and my heathen horde will depart in peace." The bishop, a kindly soul named Syriacus, his robes embroidered with silver threads, peered down from the battlements, mercy ward with caution in his heart. Tales of Viking atrocities had reached even this remote corner of Italy. But the man's plea tugged at Christian compassion and the promise of salvation for a soul so mighty. It was a temptation too divine to resist. Trumpets sounded the gates creak, and the procession shuffled in, footsteps echoing on cobblestones worn smooth by Roman legions long dead. Inside the shadowed nave of Luna's cathedral, candles flickered like dying stars, casting long shadows on frescoes of saints and martyrs. The air hung heavy with incense and the murmur of Latin prayers. Hastine's mourners knelt in pews, heads bowed, hands clasped over hidden daggers. The bishop anointed the bier, chanting rites for the departed, oblivious to the quickened breaths beneath the cloth. Then, as the final amen faded, Hastine exploded from his shroud like Loki unchained. With a roar that shook the rafters, he seized the bishop by the throat, his sword, drawn from the bier's hidden sheath, flashing in the candlelight. Blood sprayed the altar as the first guards fell, throats slit before alarms could rise. The monks shed their robes, axes, and spears leaping to hand, turning the sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. Screams echoed off vaulted ceilings, mingling with the clash of steel and the splinter of pews. Hastine fought like a demon, his blade carving a path to the nave's doors, where he bellowed for his brothers outside. The gates shuddered open moments later, and the Viking tide poured in. Bjorn at the fore, his iron helm gleaming, shield bashing aside spear-wielding defenders. Luna fell in the space of an hour, its streets running red, homes gutted for silver. The cathedral stripped of reliquaries that had gathered dust since the days of Constantine. In the aftermath, as dawn painted the Magra crimson, Bjorn strode the forum, kicking aside shattered amphorae and trampled banners. Hastine, bloodied but grinning like a wolf with a fresh kill, dragged a trembling merchant before him. "This is Rome," the man stammered in terror, eyes wide. "Your city of wonders, your prize of gold." Bjorn's laughter boomed, but it died as the merchant whispered the truth. Luna, not Rome. They had sailed too far north, chasing ghosts on faulty stars, landing not at the Tiber's 7 hills, but at a forgotten Etruscan echo, a city whose prime had faded with the Republic. Rage twisted Bjorn's face, the audacity of fate to dangle eternity and snatch it away. "Then we take what Rome owes us," he snarled, and the sack turned biblical. Warriors hauled tapestries, jewelry, wine casks. Women and children chained for the slave markets of Dublin. Elders cut down if they slowed the march. Flames licked the walls by noon, a pyre for their dashed dreams, sending pillars of smoke that blotted the sun. What booty they couldn't carry they burned. A Viking spite against the gods' cruel jest, yet defeat, never. The fleet shoved off with holds groaning under plunder. Richer than any raid on Paris, they veered south, hitting Fiesole and the Arno's bends, then crossing to Sicily, where Saracen emirs paid tribute to avoid the dragon's breath. North Africa beckoned next, the coasts of what is now Tunisia, where they stormed Nekor, enslaving Berbers and loading amphorae of olive oil. Legends whisper they pushed as far as Alexandria, tasting the Nile's mud and bartering with spice merchants under pharaonic shadows. But the sea is a fickle mistress. At the Straits of Gibraltar, returning homeward, disaster struck. The Muslim navy of Al-Andalus, sleek dhows armed with Greek fire, that devil's brew of naphtha and quicklime, swarmed like hornets. Pots of flame arced through the twilight, shattering on decks, turning ships into infernos. Men leaped screaming into the waves, their armor dragging them to Poseidon's embrace. 42 longships perished, a funeral pyre on the water that lit the rock of Gibraltar for miles. Bjorn, on his flagship, hacked through borders, his axe felling captains like wheat, but the losses scarred deep. Half his kin gone, their screams haunting the survivors' dreams. Revenge came swift. Limping north, the remnant fleet fell on Pamplona, the Basque stronghold, scaling its walls in a frenzy of fury. The city crumbled, its Prince Garcia Iñiguez captured and ransomed for a king's fortune in gold and horses. It was a balm for the wound, a reminder that even in error, Vikings wrote their own fates. By 862, the 20 surviving ships beached on the Loire, their warriors hailed as heroes, their tales already twisting into saga. Bjorn returned to Sweden not broken, but tempered, defeating the rival king Eystein Bailey in a clash of shields and spells, claiming Uppsala's throne. There, amid runestones and yew groves, he ruled wisely, siring Eric the Victorious, weaving peace with trade. But the fire of Rome never fully died. Years later, with brothers Ivar the Boneless and Sigurd Snake in the Eye, he sailed to England, avenging Ragnar on King Aella, the Blood Eagle, ribs flayed like wings. Lungs pulled forth to the sun, marked Aella's end, a ritual as poetic as it was gruesome. ensuring the father's ghost rested easy. And what of Rome? The city they nearly claimed slumbered on, its popes plotting with Frankish crowns, its ruins whispering of glories past. But Bjorn's shadow lingered. His raid on Luna rippled through chronicles. Arab historians noting the Magus, fire worshippers, who scorched their coasts, Italian annalists lamenting the northern demons who mistook moon for sun. In the sagas compiled centuries later by Icelandic skalds, the tale grew. Hastein's coffin, a miracle of guile. Luna's fall, a near apocalypse for Christendom. Historians today debate the details. Was the mistake real or saga embellishment? Records from the Abbey of Noirmoutier confirm the fleet's departure. Liutprand of Cremona's annals note Luna's sack in 860. Archaeology yields hints. Norse combs in Tuscan digs, Arab coins in Swedish hoards. Truth and legend entwine like ivy on Hadrian's wall, but the essence endures. A Viking king, bold enough to chase empires, cunning enough to crack their gates, who turned blunder into ballad. This near victory reshaped the Viking world. It proved the Mediterranean no myth, a sea of silk and slaughter, where Norse axes could cleave Muslim crescents and Christian crosses alike. It inspired later raids, Harald Hardrada's Varangian guards in Byzantine halls, Leif Erikson's westward leaps. Bjorn died around 880, buried under a howe in Sweden, his iron side facing Valhalla. But his challenge to Rome echoes in every longship's sail, every skald's verse. That even the eternal city could tremble before a northern storm. In the end, he didn't win the prize, but he won immortality. A king who dared the impossible and nearly wrote the world's ending. The salt crust on Bjorn's lips tasted of every mile he had stolen from the sea, every corpse he had left bobbing in the wake of his dragon-proud flagship. Dawn broke over the Ligurian coast like a cracked eggshell, spilling pale gold across the water, and still the Vikings rowed. Their oars dipped in perfect unison, the rhythm of men who had learned to breathe with the tide. Behind them, the smoke of Luna curled upward in a lazy black ribbon, the city's dying breath. Ahead lay the open throat of the Tyrrhenian Sea, and somewhere beyond the haze, the true Rome, 7 hills crowned with marble, a prize that had slipped through their fingers like water through a net. Bjorn stood at the prow, one boot on the gunwale, his cloak snapping in the wind. The iron rings braided into his beard clinked softly, a sound like distant war bells. He did not speak. He did not need to. Every man aboard knew the taste of failure, and every man aboard knew that Bjorn Ironside did not swallow it. The fleet had shrunk to 60 ships now, 2 lost to hidden reefs off the Balearics, their crews swallowed by the dark. The holds groaned under the weight of Luna's plunder, silver candelabra twisted like frozen flames, bolts of scarlet silk that caught the sun and bled color, amphorae sealed with wax and stamped with the bishop's ring. Slaves huddled in the bilges, their wrists raw from iron, their eyes reflecting the same storm that brewed in Bjorn's. He had promised them Rome. Instead, he had given them a corpse city, a moon goddess's husk. The sagas would call it cunning. The skalds would sing of Hastein's coffin and the bishop's blood on the altar. But here, on the open water, with the stink of burning pine still in their nostrils, the truth was simpler. They had been tricked by their own ambition. The sea did not care. The sea only carried them forward. Hastein came to stand beside him, leaning on the rail with the easy grace of a man who had died once and found it amusing. His hair, once the color of ripe wheat, was streaked with ash from Luna's pyre. A fresh scar split his left eyebrow, a gift from a loony spearman who had almost ruined the ruse. "The men are restless," he said, voice low, pitched for Bjorn's ears alone. "They count the silver and find it wanting. They wanted Caesar's gold, not some provincial priest's trinkets." Bjorn's laugh was a short, sharp bark that made the nearest oarsman flinch. "They wanted Rome," he said. "I gave them fire. Fire is honest." Hastein tilted his head, studying his king the way a raven studies a battlefield. "And what will you give them next, Ironside? More fire or the real thing?" Bjorn's eyes, the pale blue of glacier ice, fixed on the horizon. "Both," he said. "And then we go home richer than gods." They made landfall at a cove south of the Arno's mouth, a crescent of sand backed by dunes and scrub pine. The ships beached in a thunder of keels on shingle, and the Vikings spilled ashore like ants from a kicked nest. Fires were lit, sentries posted, the plunder inventoried under the watchful eye of a one-eyed thrall named Skoll, who could smell a missing coin at 50 paces. Bjorn walked the tide line alone, boots sinking into wet sand, the surf hissing around his ankles. He carried no weapon, only a small iron hammer, Thor's mark, that hung from a thong at his belt. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine and something else, the faint, sweet rot of the marshes inland, where the Arno spilled its silt into the sea. He crouched, scooped a handful of water, let it run through his fingers. Somewhere in that silt, he thought, lay the bones of Etruscan kings who had once ruled these coasts before Rome devoured them. History was a hungry thing. It ate cities and spat out ghosts. That night, around a fire of driftwood and ship's tar, the council gathered. Not the grand thing of saga, kings on thrones with mead horns and harps, but a rough circle of men squatting on their haunches, passing a skin of sour wine looted from a Pisan cellar. Hastein spoke first, his voice carrying the lilt of the Danish marshes. "We are 3 weeks' sail from the Tiber if the winds hold. The coast is dotted with watchtowers, but they are stone teeth with no bite. The Italians fight like merchants, counting costs before they draw steel." A murmur of approval rippled through the circle. Then Ubi, Bjorn's younger cousin, a bear of a man with a broken nose and a laugh like grinding millstones, raised a ham-sized fist. "And when we reach Rome? The walls are higher than Luna's, the garrison larger. We bled for a village. What will the city cost?" Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a nightjar. Bjorn let the silence stretch until it was a living thing, coiling around their throats. Then he stood, and the firelight painted his shadow huge against the dunes. "Rome is not a city," he said. "It is a story, and stories can be rewritten." He drew his sayax, the short blade every Viking carried, and drove it into the sand between his feet. "We do not need to breach the walls. We need to breach their faith. The Pope sits in his palace, fat on tithes and fear. His guards are mercenaries who fight for pay, not gods. We give them a miracle. We give them a sign from their own heaven. And when the gates open," he did not finish. He did not need to. The men leaned forward, eyes gleaming like wolves scenting blood. The plan took shape over the next 3 days, hammered out in the shade of sailcloth awnings, while the ships were careened and patched. Hastein would take 20 ships and sail south, hugging the coast, raiding as he went. Ostia, the port of Rome, would be his bait. He would burn the warehouses, sink the grain fleet, send columns of smoke to stain the sky above the Tiber. Rome would look south and see the dragon's breath. Meanwhile, Bjorn would lead the main force inland, up the Arno, then overland through the passes of the Apennines. They would strike from the north, where the city's eyes were blind. But the heart of the plan was not steel. It was spectacle. From the plunder of Luna, they had taken something priceless, the bishop's mitre, encrusted with pearls and gold, and a reliquary said to contain a splinter of the true cross. These would be their Trojan horse. They marched at dawn on the 4th day, leaving the ships under guard with a skeleton crew of wounded and boys too young for the shield wall. The column snaked inland, 2,000 men, a river of iron and leather, shields slung across backs, axes glinting in the morning sun. The path followed the Arno at first, the river's banks lush with willows and the drone of cicadas. Villagers fled at their approach, driving livestock into the hills, but the Vikings took only what they needed: grain, wine, a few goats for the pot. Discipline was iron. Bjorn had seen what happened when raiders turned to rape and random slaughter. The locals banded together, the roads filled with partisans, the march bogged down in blood and vengeance. He wanted Rome intact, its treasuries unburned, its gates opened by trembling hands. The Apennines rose before them like the spine of some vast beast. Cloaked in oak and chestnut, the air growing cooler with every mile. They crossed streams swollen with snowmelt, the water so cold it numbed the feet even through leather boots. At night, they camped in clearings where the stars pressed close and the skalds sang of older journeys, Sigurd's dragon, Beowulf's mere, the time Thor fished for the world serpent with an ox head bait. Bjorn listened, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over maps scratched on bark, calculating distances, weighing risks. Hastein would be off the coast by now, his sails black against the horizon, the first fires blooming along the shore. Rome would be stirring, its senate in uproar, the Pope dispatching couriers to every corner of Christendom. Good, let them look south. Let them empty the northern gates. On the seventh day, they crested a ridge and looked down into the valley of the Tiber. The river wound below them like a silver ribbon, its banks dotted with villas and vineyards, the air thick with the scent of crushed grapes. And there, in the distance, shrouded in haze, rose the seven hills, Rome. Even from this far, it was unmistakable. The dome of the Pantheon, a dull gold in the sun. The Colosseum, a broken crown. The smoke of 1,000 hearths rising in lazy spirals. Bjorn's breath caught, a rare moment of awe. He had seen Paris, its wooden walls and muddy streets. He had seen Luna, its marble cracked and weary. But this was the heart of the world, beating still after 1,000 years of war and plague and barbarian boots. He felt the weight of it, the way a man feels the weight of a mountain when he stands at its foot. They descended under cover of darkness, moving in silence, the column breaking into smaller bands that ghosted through the olive groves like shadows. Bjorn's group, 50 of his best, Hostein's Miracle at the center, approached the Porta Flaminia, the northern gate where the Via Flaminia entered the city. The reliquary, wrapped in silk and borne on a litter, gleamed faintly in the moonlight. The mitre rested on a pillow of crimson, its pearls catching starlight like tears. 2 monks, Vikings with shaved heads and borrowed robes, walked ahead, ringing handbells and chanting in mangled Latin. The rest followed at a distance, cloaked and hooded, weapons hidden beneath pilgrim staffs. The guards at the gate were half asleep, their spears leaning against the wall, a dice game flickering in the torchlight. The monks approached, voices rising in a hymn to St. Peter. One guard, a grizzled sergeant with a face like old leather, squinted into the dark. "Who goes there?" he barked in the rough dialect of the Roman streets. The lead monk, a warrior named Ketil One Hand, who had lost 3 fingers to a Frankish sword, raised the reliquary high. "Pilgrims from the north," he called, his Latin thick but passable. "We bring a miracle, the true cross. Saved from the heathen flames at Luna, the bishop himself sends us to the Holy Father." The sergeant's eyes widened. Word of Luna's sack had reached Rome days ago, carried by fleeing merchants and panic-stricken priests. The true cross, lost then found, it was the stuff of prophecy. The gates creaked open, and the procession shuffled through. The city swallowed them, narrow streets winding between insula 6 stories high, the air thick with the smell of baking bread and human waste, the distant toll of a bell calling the faithful to matins. Bjorn walked at the rear, his heart a drum in his chest. Every step was a gamble. Every shadow could hide a blade. But the guards were distracted, their attention pulled south by the smoke on the horizon, by rumors of a Viking fleet burning its way up the coast. Hostein was doing his work. They reached the Piazza Navona at dawn, the sky paling to pearl above the rooftops. The square was already stirring, vendors setting up stalls, children chasing chickens, a fountain gurgling in the center. The monks set the litter down before the church of Sant'Agnese, its facade still bearing scars from the Gothic wars. A crowd gathered, drawn by the bells and the whispers of miracle. Ketil unwrapped the reliquary with reverence, lifting the splinter of wood, dark with age, stained with what might have been blood, toward the sky. "Behold," he cried, "the cross of Christ preserved by divine will." Gasps rippled through the crowd. An old woman fell to her knees weeping. A priest pushed forward, his eyes wide with fanatic gleam. Bjorn watched from the shadows of a colonnade, his hand on the hilt of his sayax. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then the priest reached for the relic and Ketil struck. The sayax flashed, burying itself in the priest's throat. Blood sprayed the altar steps, and the square erupted into chaos. The monks threw back their robes, axes and swords leaping to hand. The Vikings poured from the side streets, a tide of iron and fury. Screams echoed off the buildings as the guards, caught flat-footed, their weapons in barracks, fell beneath the onslaught. Bjorn was in the thick of it, his axe singing, cleaving helmets and hope alike. The reliquary shattered under a boot, the splinter of wood trampled into the dust. It had served its purpose. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, the northern quarter was theirs. The Porta Flaminia stood open, and the main force flooded in. 2,000 warriors roaring their battle cries, shields locked, spears leveled. The city's defenses crumbled like dry bread. The Papal Guard, a mix of Lombard mercenaries and Roman levies, fought bravely in pockets, but they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, their commanders paralyzed by the speed of the assault. Bjorn led the push toward the Vatican, the dome of St. Peter's rising ahead like a promise. The Pope, Leo IV, a frail man with the eyes of a hawk, had barricaded himself in the Leonine city, the walled enclave around the basilica. But the walls were old, the mortar crumbling, and the Vikings had brought fire. They breached the gates at noon, using a battering ram fashioned from a fallen pine. The Leonine city fell in an hour, its defenders slaughtered or fled. Bjorn strode into the basilica, his boots echoing on the marble floor, the air thick with incense and fear. The Pope stood before the altar, flanked by a dozen Swiss guards in half-plate, their halberds gleaming. Leo's voice did not waver. "You dare defile this holy place?" he said, his Latin pure and cutting. Bjorn smiled, a slow wolfish thing. "I dare much," he replied in the same tongue, surprising the old man. "But I come not to defile, I come to bargain." The terms were simple. Rome would pay a ransom, 10,000 pounds of gold, the weight of a war horse in silver, and safe passage for the Vikings to the sea. In return, the city would be spared total destruction. The Pope had no choice. His treasury was vast, swollen by centuries of pilgrimage and penance. The gold was brought in chests dragged by mules, the silver in sacks that clinked like rain on shields. Bjorn watched it piled in the nave, his eyes reflecting the gleam like a dragon on its hoard. But he was not satisfied. He took something else, hostages, noble sons and daughters, cloaked in silk and terror to ensure the city's good behavior. And he took the Pope's blessing, forced at sword point, a parchment sealed with wax and the ring of the fisherman. A joke for the sagas. They left Rome at dusk, the city smoldering behind them, the Tiber choked with debris and bodies. The march south was a triumph and a funeral. The plunder weighed down the wagons, the hostages wept in chains, the warriors sang of glory even as fever took the wounded. Hastein met them at Ostia, his ships laden with grain and wine, his face split in a grin. "You owe me a drink, Ironside," he said, clapping Bjorn on the shoulder. "I burned their bread. You stole their god." They sailed at dawn, the fleet swollen with captured galleys, the coast receding like a bad dream. The journey home was a gauntlet. Storms off Sardinia sank 3 ships, their crews lost to the deep. Saracen pirates harried them in the Balearics, boarding in the night, their curved blades flashing in the moonlight. Bjorn fought on the deck of his flagship, his axe a blur, until the sea ran red and the pirates fled. At the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, the Andalusian navy waited, sleek warships with sails of striped silk, their prows armed with rams and Greek fire. The battle lasted a day and a night, the sea lit by flames, the air thick with screams and the stench of burning pitch. 20 ships went down, their dragon heads swallowed by the waves. But the Vikings broke through, their remaining vessels limping north. Their hold still heavy with Rome's ransom, they beached on the Loire in the spring of 862, 20 ships where 62 had sailed. The Franks paid tribute to let them pass, their king Charles the Bald too busy fighting his brothers to face the northern storm. Bjorn returned to Sweden a legend, his name carved into runestones from Birka to Uppsala. He defeated Eystein Bailey in single combat, the rival king's blood soaking the sacred groves, and took the high seat at Gamla Uppsala. There, in the shadow of the great temple, he ruled for 20 years, his sons growing strong at his knee, his daughters fierce as shield maidens. But the fire of Rome never left him. In the long winters, when the fjords froze and the auroras danced, he would sit by the hearth and tell the tale, not of Luna's deception, but of the day he held the Pope's ring in his hand and made the eternal city kneel. The ransom funded a golden age. Trade flowed along the rivers, Arab silver, Byzantine silk, Frankish wine. The temple at Uppsala gleamed with new roof beams of oak, its altars heaped with offerings. Bjorn's laws were just but iron hard. A thief lost a hand, a murderer his head, a traitor his tongue. He married a daughter of the Danish king, cementing alliances, and sent his sons to raid England, where Ivar the Boneless carved a kingdom from the bones of Saxon kings. When Bjorn died around 880, he was laid in a ship burial on the banks of Lake Mälaren, his body wrapped in the scarlet silk of Rome, his axe at his side, the Pope's parchment tucked into his belt like a joke only the gods would understand. Rome itself recovered as cities do. The walls were repaired, the treasury refilled by new pilgrimages, the Pope's successor railing against the northern devils in bulls that echoed across Christendom. But the scar remained. For centuries, Roman children were warned of the Viking king who came in the guise of a pilgrim, who turned the cross into a weapon, who made the city pay for its pride. The sagas grew in the telling. Hastein's coffin became a flying ship, Bjorn's axe a thunderbolt, the ransom a mountain of gold that blotted out the sun. Historians argue over details, the exact weight of the tribute, the number of ships lost, the truth of the true cross. But the essence is unchanged. A Viking king challenged Rome and, for one brief, blazing moment, held the world in his iron grip. And in the long nights of the north, when the wind howls through the fjords and the fire burns low, the skalds still sing of Bjorn Ironside, the man who sailed to the edge of the world, who tricked death and popes alike, who came within a heartbeat of sacking the eternal city and rewriting the saga of the ages. The song ends with a laugh, sharp as an axe on stone, and the promise that somewhere, in the halls of Valhalla, Bjorn still waits, his eyes on the southern horizon, ready to sail again. The keel of Bjorn's flagship scraped the gravel of the Loire estuary with a sound like the world exhaling. Spring, 862. The riverbanks were thick with willows just leafing out in pale green, and the air carried the wet earth smell of thaw. 20 dragon prows nosed the mud behind him, 20 where 62 had left 3 years earlier. The survivors spilled ashore in silence at first, the way men do when they have seen too much and spoken too little. Then the quiet cracked. A whoop from a boy who had been 12 when they sailed and was now 15 with a beard like rust on his chin. A woman's wail from the slave pens as she recognized a brother among the rowers. The low, rolling laugh of Hastein that always sounded like coins poured onto stone. Bjorn stood on the prow a moment longer, letting the land tilt under his feet. The iron rings in his beard were dulled with salt and smoke, his cloak stiff with blood that was not all his own. He looked north, toward the faint smudge of forest that hid the road to Sweden, and felt the weight of every mile settle into his bones like winter. They camped on a spit of land the Franks called Ile de Noirmoutier, once a Viking stronghold, now abandoned to gulls and monks. The abbey's bell tower had been toppled years ago. Its stones lay scattered like the teeth of a drunk giant. Bjorn ordered the plunder unloaded under torchlight. Chests of Roman gold, stamped with the profiles of emperors long dead, were stacked in pyramids that caught the firelight and threw it back in molten shards. Sacks of hacked silver plate, candlesticks bent double, reliquaries pried open and emptied of their bones. Bolts of scarlet and purple silk, stiff with sea salt, were unrolled across the grass so the women could cut cloaks for the coming winter. The Pope's parchment, Leothfur's forced blessing, the ink still black, passed from hand to hand like a talisman. Some kissed it for luck, others spat on it for the same reason. Bjorn took it last, folded it small, and tucked it inside the leather pouch at his belt beside Thor's hammer. A joke for the gods, he thought. Let Odin puzzle it out. The hostages came next, 23 of them, roped at the ankles, blinking in the northern light. A boy of 10 with the hawk nose of the Frangipani, twin sisters from the Orsini, their hair shorn to the scalp by a zealous warrior who feared witchcraft. A Greek eunuch from the papal chancery, whose tongue had been cut out for cursing in 4 languages. They were marched to a longhouse roofed with turf and guarded by men who had lost brothers at Gibraltar and now measured their grief in the value of flesh. Ransom notes were scratched on birch bark, sealed with wax melted from Luna's cathedral candles, and entrusted to Frankish merchants willing to carry word south for a price. The first replies would not come until autumn, but Bjorn was patient. Gold talked louder than axes. For 3 days the camp was a market, a wake, and a wedding all at once. Warriors bartered loot for amber beads and walrus ivory brought by traders who had smelled profit on the wind. Skalds composed verses on the spot, their voices rising over the clang of smiths repairing mail. A berserker named Thorkel the Red, 7 feet tall and scarred from scalp to sole, married a captured Irish girl in a ceremony that involved more mead than vows, and ended with him carrying her over a shield instead of a threshold. Children born on the voyage were presented to the chieftains. A boy with Hastein's sly eyes, a girl with Bjorn's pale stare. Names were given: Ragnvald, Astrid, names that carried the weight of expectation. The dead were remembered in silence. No pyres here. The sea had taken its due. Instead, each man carved a rune on a whalebone plaque and hung it from the prow of his ship. 62 plaques for 62 ships. 42 would never sail again. On the fourth morning, Bjorn summoned the council. Not the drunken circle of the dunes, but a formal thing inside the half-ruined abbey church. Its altar smashed, but the vaulted roof still intact. Sunlight slanted through broken windows and fell across the mosaic floor in colored shards. The chieftains sat on overturned wine casks, their shields propped against the walls like sleeping beasts. Haystein lounged at Bjorn's right, picking his teeth with a silver spoon taken from a Roman cardinal. Ubbi the bear squatted opposite, gnawing a leg of mutton. Skull, the one-eyed thrall, stood behind a table piled with tally sticks, his quill scratching as he accounted every ounce of treasure. When all were settled, Bjorn rose. The hall felt quiet enough to hear the gulls outside. 3 winters ago, he began, voice carrying to the rafters. We sailed south with empty holds and full hearts. We return with holds full and hearts heavier. The sea took 42 ships. The fire took cities. The gods took our brothers. But we took something too. He gestured to the plunder stacked along the walls. Rome's ransom. Not the city, never the city, but its fear, its gold. Its name on our lips. A low growl of approval rippled through the hall. Now we go home. But home is not the fjord we left. Home is what we make it. Sweden is split. Eystein Belly sits in Uppsala, growing fat on tribute. My father's blood calls. My sons grow without a high seat. We march north, and we take what is ours. The plan was simple in outline, brutal in detail. The fleet would sail up the coast to the Skagerrak, then into the Baltic. From Gotland, they would portage across to Lake Mälaren, the heartwater of the sphere. Speed was everything. Eystein would expect them weakened, scattered by losses. Instead, they would strike like a hammer on hot iron. The plunder would buy allies. Danish silver for Geatish spears, Frankish horses for Rus's archers. The hostages would buy silence. Roman nobles whispering in papal ears that Bjorn Ironside was a force best left unbothered. And the saga would buy loyalty. Every skald in the north would sing of the king who made the Pope kneel. Men would flock to his banner for the story alone. They sailed at the turn of the tide. The Loire receded behind them, its muddy waters giving way to the gray chop of the Atlantic. Storms harried them off Brittany, waves higher than a longhouse roof. The sky split by lightning that turned the sea to boiling silver. One ship foundered on the rocks of Ushant, its crew clinging to the dragon prow until the sea claimed them. Bjorn ordered the wreckage burned as a sacrifice to Aegir, the ocean giant. The smoke rose black against the dawn, and the fleet sailed on. They wintered in a fjord on the Jutland coast, repairing hulls with pine tar and iron nails forged from melted Roman chalices. The hostages were kept in a turf longhouse under guard, their Latin prayers mingling with Norse curses. The Greek eunuch taught a warrior's son to read runes. The Orsini twins learned to throw a spear. Strange bonds formed in the dark months, the way iron binds to carbon in the forge. Spring brought the melt. The fleet, 19 ships now, crossed the Skagerrak under sails dyed scarlet with madder root looted from Pisa. They beached at Birka, the great trading town on Lake Mälaren, its palisade bristling with spears. The Jarl there, a woman named Astrid the White, greeted them with caution and mead. She had heard the tales, Rome's ransom, the Pope's parchment, the Viking king who walked through fire. Bjorn gifted her a bolt of Byzantine silk and the hand of the Greek eunuch as a scribe. In return, she gave passage and news. Eystein Belly had raised a host of 3,000, bolstered by Geatish mercenaries and a pact with the Danish king Horik. Uppsala was fortified, its temple ringed with sacrifices. The omens were mixed. Ravens circled the sacred grove, but a white reindeer had been seen at dawn, a sign of favor or doom depending on the priest. Bjorn did not wait. He struck inland with a flying column, 500 picked men, light armor, no wagons. The rest followed with the plunder, moving slow along the river roads. They marched through forests of birch and pine, the ground carpeted with last year's needles, the air thick with resin and the drone of midges. Villages surrendered at the sight of the scarlet sails on the lake, their headmen offering grain and daughters. Bjorn took the grain, left the daughters. He had learned in Rome that fear was a sharper weapon than lust. On the seventh day, they crested the ridge above Uppsala and looked down on the plain. The temple mound rose in the center, its roof beams carved with serpents, smoke curling from the sacrifice fires. Eystein's banner, a black boar on yellow, flew above the palisade. The host was encamped in a sprawl of tents and horse lines, the glint of mail visible even at distance. The battle came at dusk, the way Bjorn liked it. His scouts had cut the Geatish supply lines 2 nights earlier, burning wagons and scattering horses. Eystein's men were hungry, their allies restless. Bjorn's force formed a boar snout wedge, shields locked, spears bristling, the scarlet cloaks of Rome a splash of blood against the green. They charged down the slope with a roar that shook the ravens from the trees. The first clash was chaos, steel on steel, the wet thunk of axes in flesh, the screams of horses. Bjorn was in the front rank, his axe ablur, cleaving shields and hope. Hastin flanked left with the archers, arrows hissing like serpents. Ubbi the bear led the reserve, a hammer held back for the anvil. Eystein met them in the center, a giant in bearskin, his sword two-handed and hungry. The duel was brief and brutal. Bjorn took a blow on the shoulder that dented his mail, then hooked the king's leg and brought him down. The axe fell once, twice. Eystein's head rolled into the grass, eyes still open, staring at the sky. The boar banner fell. The Geats broke first, then the Danes. By moonrise, the field was Bjorn's, the temple gates open. The sacred grove, silent but for the drip of blood from the altars. He entered Uppsala at dawn, walking the processional way between rows of kneeling warriors. The temple doors, carved oak bound with iron, stood ajar. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of blood and pine smoke. The idol of Thor loomed at the far end, red-bearded, hammer raised, eyes of amber glowing in the torchlight. Bjorn knelt, not in submission but in reckoning. He laid Eystein's head at the god's feet, then the Pope's parchment beside it. A joke for the ages. The priests, old men with beards to their belts, watched in silence. One stepped forward, voice quavering. The omen spoke true. The white reindeer was your sign, Ironside. Bjorn rose. The omens speak what men make them, he said. Today they speak my name. The coronation was not grand. No crown of gold, no throne of ivory. Just a high seat carved from oak, its arms worn smooth by generations of kings. Bjorn sat in the hall filled with the roar of voices, his name over and over until the rafters shook. The plunder was divided, a third to the gods, a third to the warriors, a third to the king's hoard. The Roman gold bought peace with the Danes, the silk bought brides for his sons, the hostages bought silence from the south. The Greek eunuch stayed as scribe, his quill scratching the new laws. No blood feud within the temple precinct, no slave taken from a free man's kin, no jarl to raise a host without the king's word. The old ways bent, but did not break. Years passed like waves on a shore. Bjorn ruled from Uppsala for 18 winters, his hair graying to iron, his eyes still pale and sharp. He sent his sons raiding, Eric to the Baltic, Ragnvald to England, where Ivar the Boneless carved a kingdom from Saxon bones. His daughters married jarls and bore warriors. The temple grew rich on trade. Arab dirhams, Frankish glass, Byzantine icons traded for furs and amber. The Pope's parchment hung in the hall, faded but legible, a reminder that even the eternal city could be made to kneel. Skalds sang of the voyage south, of Hastein's coffin and Bjorn's axe, of the day the north wind blew through St. Peter's. Children learned the verses by heart. In the end, death came quietly. A fever in the autumn of 880, brought by traders from the east. Bjorn lay in the high seat, wrapped in the scarlet silk of Rome, his axe across his knees. His last words were to his youngest son, a boy of 12 with his mother's dark eyes. "Tell the Skalds," he whispered, "I took Rome's gold, but I left its soul. That is victory enough." They burned him on a ship in Lake Mellerin, the flames rising high, the smoke carrying his name to the stars. The hoard was buried with him. Gold, silver, the Pope's ring melted into a torque around his neck. The mound still stands, grass-grown and silent, a dragon sleeping under the earth. Rome remembered. Chronicles spoke of the northern king who came in pilgrim's guise, who turned the cross into a weapon, who exacted a ransom that funded a northern empire. Popes railed against the Magus, the fire worshippers, but the gold was spent, the walls repaired, the city endured. In the north, the saga grew. Bjorn Ironside, the man who sailed to the edge of the world and brought back its heart. Every longship that cut the waves carried his echo. Every skald who lifted his voice in the hall sang his name. And in the long nights when the auroras danced and the wind howled through the fjords, men swore they saw a dragon ship on the horizon, its sails scarlet as blood, its prow cutting the clouds. Bjorn, sailing still, forever chasing the 7 hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The Greek eunuch's name was Nikitas, though the Vikings called him Nicky the Knife Tongue, because the stump where his tongue had been still clicked when he tried to speak. He had been 30 when the papal guards dragged him from the Lateran scriptorium, 33 when Bjorn's men chained him in the hold of a longship, and 35 when the cold of the Baltic first bit his shaved scalp. Now, in the autumn of 862, he sat on a 3-legged stool in the scriptorium of Gamla Uppsala, a low timber room lit by whale oil lamps and the pale northern sun that slanted through a smoke hole. His ink-stained fingers moved across vellum, real vellum, not birch bark, scratching runes and Latin in alternating columns. The laws of Bjorn Ironside flowed from his quill. No man shall raise steel within the temple garth. No jarl shall withhold the king's third of raid spoil. No slave born of free womb shall be sold south of the Danevirke. Each clause was a small victory for order, a tether on the wild heart of the north. Nikitas had not expected to live, let alone to matter. In Rome, he had been a cipher, copying bulls and indulgences for cardinals who never learned his name. Here, he was the king's voice on parchment, the bridge between 2 worlds. Bjorn consulted him nightly, leaning over the table with the smell of pine smoke and mead on his breath. "Write it so the priests in Birka can read it," the king would say, tapping a clause with a calloused finger, "and so the skalds can sing it." Nikitas learned to weave Latin legalese with the rolling cadence of saga meter to make law sound like legend. When the first copy was finished, Bjorn had it read aloud in the hall. The warriors listened in silence, then pounded shields in approval. A law that could be sung was a law that would be obeyed. Across the courtyard, in a longhouse roofed with turf and hung with Roman tapestries, the Orsini twins practiced spear throws against a straw target. They were 16 now, their scalps grown out in dark curls, their arms corded with muscle from hauling water and splitting firewood. They had arrived in chains. They left the slave pen the day their ransom arrived from Rome, 10 pounds of gold and a letter sealed with the Orsini crest. But they did not sail south. Their father's note was curt: "The city remembers your shame. Stay where you are useful." So they stayed. The Vikings called them Vargflakorna, the wolf girls, and taught them to ride shaggy northern ponies and to loose arrows from horseback. In return, the twins taught the shield maidens how to read the stars the Roman way, how to navigate by the pole star and the hourglass. At night they sat by the fire with the other women, braiding each other's hair with silver rings taken from Luna's cathedral, speaking a mongrel tongue of Latin, Norse, and curses. The boy with the frangipani nose was named Giovanni, though the Vikings shortened it to Vani. He was 12 when they took him, 15 when he stood on the walls of Uppsala and watched Bjorn's banner rise above the temple mound. He had been a hostage, then a page, then, when his skill with a bow became apparent, a huntsman. Bjorn took him on the great elk hunts in the forests north of the lake, where the trees grew so thick the sun was a rumor. Vani learned to move in silence, to read the scrape of antler on bark, to loose an arrow through a gap no wider than a man's fist. In return, he taught the king's sons the Roman game of ludus latrunculorum, soldiers and king on a checkered board, a game of siege and capture. Eric, the eldest, took to it with a ferocity that made Bjorn laugh. "You play like you fight," the king said. "All fire and no patience." Vani smiled, a small secret thing. He was learning patience. One day he thought he would play the game with real armies. Seasons turned. The Roman gold bought iron from the Rhineland, glass from Frisia, wine from the Loire. The temple at Uppsala grew a new wing, timber framed with oak beams carved in the Roman style, columns looted from a Tuscan villa and shipped north in the belly of a gnar. The priests grumbled at the heathen stone, but Bjorn silenced them with a purse of hacked silver. Thor cares not for the shape of his roof, he said, only that the sacrifices come. The first Christian chapel in Sweden was built the same year, not in Uppsala, but in Birka, a small timber structure with a cross above the door and a runestone beside it. The priest was a Frank named Ansgar, half mad with zeal, who preached to merchants and slaves alike. Bjorn attended once out of curiosity. He listened to the Latin Mass, the smell of incense thick in his nostrils, and thought of the day he had stood in St. Peter's with blood on his boots. When Ansgar asked for his soul, Bjorn laughed. "I have given enough to your God," he said. "He still owes me interest." The hostages were not the only Southerners to stay. A Pisan merchant named Lorenzo, captured off the Arno, saw profit in the north. He spoke Greek, Latin, and enough Norse to haggle. Bjorn gave him a stall in the Birka market and a guard of 2 warriors to keep the thieves honest. Lorenzo traded Roman glass for reindeer hides, Frankish swords for walrus ivory, Arab silver for amber that glowed like trapped sunlight. His ledgers, written in a cipher only Nikitas could read, grew fat. When the first caravan of Russ's traders arrived from the east, their boats low in the water with furs and slaves, Lorenzo was there to greet them with a smile and a scale. He sent word south by Frankish ship. "The north is open. The king is just, come and trade." More came. A Syrian physician with a beard like black wool, a Moorish astrologer who read the stars in Arabic, a Jewish silversmith from Cordoba who taught the Viking smiths to work filigree so fine it looked like lace. Uppsala became a crossroads, its streets loud with tongues the old gods had never heard. The Wolf girls married in the spring of 865. The elder, Lucia, took a jarl's son named Ingvar One-Eye, who had lost his left orb to a Saxon arrow at York. The younger, Beatrice, chose a shield maiden named Brynhild the Red, whose braid was the color of fresh blood and whose laugh could shatter ice. The weddings were held in the new hall, its walls hung with Roman tapestries and Norse shields. Bjorn gave each bride a torque of Roman gold and a sayax with a hilt of walrus ivory. The feasts lasted 3 days, roast elk, honey mead, skalds singing of love and war until their voices cracked. Vani stood as cupbearer, his bow slung across his back, his eyes on the high seat where Bjorn sat with his queen, a Danish princess whose belly was just beginning to swell with their 4th child. The king caught his gaze and raised his horn. Vani raised his own. A silent toast between hostage and king, between south and north. The saga grew with every telling. In the long winter nights when the fjords froze and the auroras danced like green fire, the skalds gathered in the hall. They sang of the voyage south, of the storm off Sardinia that swallowed 3 ships, of the night Hastein rose from his coffin in Luna's cathedral, of the day Bjorn stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel. But the songs changed with each voice. In Birka, the merchants added verses about the ransom that bought a kingdom. In Gotland, the farmers sang of the Roman gold that paved the roads. In the west, where Ivar the Boneless ruled in Dublin, the Irish bards wove the tale into their own cycles, making Bjorn a giant who strode the Tiber and drank the Pope's wine from his own chalice. The truth frayed at the edges, but the heart held. A Viking king had sailed to the edge of the world and come back with its soul in his fist. Nikitas wrote it all down, not just the laws but the stories. He had a chest of vellum now, bound in oak and locked with iron. The Gesta Bjorni, he called it, in the Roman style. The deeds of Bjorn. He wrote in Latin for the south, in runes for the north, and in a private cipher for himself. When the king asked why, Nikitas smiled his lipless smile, so that one day, when the skalds are dust and the gold is spent, someone will still know what happened. Bjorn grunted. "Let them know I took what was mine." Nikitas wrote that too. The Wolf girls bore children. Lucia's first was a boy with Ingvar's one eye and her own dark curls. They named him Romano, after the city that had birthed his mother's shame and his father's pride. Beatrice's daughter had Brynhild's red hair and a laugh like breaking glass. They called her Fridas, after the shield maiden of legend. Vani took a wife from the Geats, a quiet girl with hands clever at the loom. Their son was born in the spring of 868. The same year, Bjorn's youngest daughter married a prince of the Rus. The boy had his father's hawk nose and his mother's pale eyes. They named him Leo, after the Pope who had knelt. Years passed. The Roman gold bought peace, then prosperity, then legend. The temple at Uppsala grew a second wing. its walls painted with scenes of the voyage south, Bjorn's axe raised in St. Peter's, a stein rising from the coffin, the dragon ships burning at Gibraltar. The priests still sacrificed boars at midsummer, but now they poured Frankish wine on the altars and hung crosses of amber beside the runes. Ansgar's chapel in Birka became a cathedral, its bell cast from melted Roman chalices. The first bishop was a Saxon named Rimbert, who preached in Norse and Latin and never once mentioned the Pope's ransom. The old gods and the new sat side by side, uneasy but enduring. Bjorn aged. The iron in his beard turned to silver. The lines around his eyes deepened into fjords. He walked with a limp from an old wound at Pamplona, but his voice still carried to the rafters. He taught his grandsons to row, to read the stars, to play La Truncolorum with stones on a checkered board scratched in the dirt. He told them stories, not the skald's songs, but the truth as he remembered it. The stink of the Tiber at dawn, the weight of the Pope's ring in his palm, the way the sea had screamed at Gibraltar. "Glory is a liar," he told Romano one night, the boy's head on his knee. "It promises forever and gives you a song. But a song is enough, if it's the right one." The mound was raised in the autumn of 880. The ship was old, its timbers patched with Roman oak, its sail dyed scarlet with madder from Pisa. They laid Bjorn in the prow, his axe across his chest, the Pope's parchment tucked into his belt. The torque of melted gold gleamed at his throat. The wolf girls stood at the head, their children beside them. Vani held the torch. Nikitas read the runes he had carved on the prow. Here lies Bjorn Ironside, king of the sphere, who took Rome's gold and left its soul. The flames caught, rose high, carried his name to the stars. The mound was sealed with earth and stone, grass sown on top. In the spring, wildflowers grew, Roman poppies somehow, their seeds carried north in the fold of a tapestry. The hostages stayed. Niketas died in 895, his vellum chest buried with him in the Christian cemetery at Birka. The Gesta Bjorni was copied, carried south by Frankish monks, east by Russ's traders, west by Irish scribes. Fragments survive in the Vatican archives, in the runestones of Uppland, in the sagas of Iceland. The wolf girls grew old, their grandchildren speaking Norse with a Roman lilt. Vani's son Leo became a jarl, his hawk nose a banner on the shields of his warband. The scarlet silk faded, the gold was spent, the tapestries moth-eaten. But the song endured. In the long nights of the north, when the wind howls through the fjords and the auroras dance, the skalds still sing. They sing of the king who sailed south with 62 ships and came back with 20. Of the day he stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel, of the ransom that bought a kingdom and the lie that became legend. They sing of the wolf girls who threw spears and bore kings, of the eunuch who wrote the law, of the boy who learned to hunt elk and play a Roman game. And they sing of the mound by Lake Malaran, where a dragon sleeps under the earth, its sail scarlet as blood, its prow cutting the clouds. Bjorn Ironside, who challenged Rome and nearly won, who took its gold and left its soul, who sails still in the songs of the north, forever chasing the 7 hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The first spade bit into the mound on a morning in July 1928, when the Swedish sun hung low and the air smelled of pine resin and distant rain. The site was known locally as Kungshögen, the King's Mound, on the western shore of Lake Mälaren, a drumlin of earth and stone rising 30 feet above the water, its flanks grown over with birch and wild raspberry. For centuries it had been left alone, a silent sentinel between the modern town of Sigtuna and the ruins of Old Uppsala. Farmers plowed around it. Children dared each other to spend a night on its crest. Antiquarians sketched it and moved on. But in the spring of 1928, a letter arrived at the State Historical Museum in Stockholm. It was written in a spidery hand on paper yellowed by Baltic damp, postmarked Birka, and signed simply E. Lindqvist. Inside was a single sentence: "The dragon sleeps, but its hoard wakes." Enclosed was a coin, gold, thin as a communion wafer, stamped with the profile of a man in a laurel wreath and the legend LEOPP4. A papal coin, dated 847, found, the letter claimed, by a plowboy on the mound's eastern slope. The director, Sigurd Kerman, read the letter twice, turned the coin under a magnifying glass, and booked the next train north. By midsummer, a team of 20, Archaeologists, students, laborers, and one skeptical photographer from the Stockholm Dagblad had pitched canvas tents in the shadow of the mound. Their leader was a young assistant curator named Sune Lindqvist, 33, thin as a fence rail, with a pipe clenched permanently between his teeth and a habit of quoting the sagas when no one was listening. He had grown up on stories of Bjorn Ironside. His grandmother swore their family descended from a shield maiden who had sailed with the king. Lindqvist did not believe in destiny, but he believed in spades. They began with a trench on the eastern flank where the coin had surfaced. The soil was heavy clay, dark with centuries of leaf mold. At 2 meters they hit gravel, river-rounded stones laid in deliberate rings. At 3 meters the gravel gave way to charcoal, thick and black, smelling faintly of pine even after 1,000 years. Lindqvist knelt, brushed the ash with his fingers, and felt his pulse quicken. Ship burial. The charcoal was the ghost of a hull. They widened the trench, working in silence now, the only sounds the scrape of trowels and the distant cry of a loon on the lake. At 4 meters they found the first rivet, iron, clenched the size of a man's thumb. Then another. Then a dozen. The clenched fists of a dragon ship, holding the earth together. By the end of the first week, the outline emerged. A vessel 45 feet long, clinker-built, its stem and stern posts curved like the neck of a swan. The wood was gone, eaten by fungi and time, but the shape remained in negative. Dark soil where planks had been, lighter sand where the bilge had rested. Lindqvist traced the shear line with a trembling finger. She was fast, he whispered to no one. Built for the open sea. They photographed every centimeter, then began to lift. The rivets came first, each tagged and bagged. Then the iron, anchor flukes, a cauldron rim, a sword blade snapped at the hilt. And then, at the center of what had been the deck, the hoard. It was not a chest. It was a nest. A shallow depression lined with scarlet silk. Still scarlet, the matter dye defiant after a millennium, piled with objects that made the students gasp and the photographer drop his tripod. Gold torques twisted into knots. Silver chalices crushed flat. A papal ring, the fisherman's keys worn smooth. A fragment of vellum folded small, the ink faded to brown but legible. Leo Episcopus Servus, Servorum Dei. The Pope's forced blessing, and beneath it all, the axe, double-bitted. The haft long rotted away, but the head perfect. Iron inlaid with silver wire in the shape of a serpent devouring its own tail. Lindqvist lifted it with both hands, and the weight of it felt like judgment. They worked through August, the mound opening like a flower. The ship had been placed stern first into a cleft in the drumlin, its prow facing the lake. The body, Bjorn's body, had lain in the prow, wrapped in the silk, the axe across his chest. No bones remained. The acidic soil had dissolved them. But the impression was there. The hollow of a skull, the curve of a shoulder, the ghost of a beard braided with iron rings. Around the body offerings, a bear's paw, claws intact, a child's wooden sword, a woman's comb carved from walrus ivory, and coins, hundreds of them, scattered like seed. Arab dirhams, Frankish deniers, Byzantine solidi, and more papal coins, all pierced and strung on a decayed leather cord. Lindqvist cataloged them until his eyes burned. The dates ranged from 850 to 879. The latest was a silver penny of Alfred the Great, minted in London. Bjorn had died the year before the great heathen army was broken at Eddington. Word spread. Newspapers ran headlines. Viking king's tomb found, Rome's ransom unearthed. Tourists arrived by steamer, crowding the cordon site. Lindqvist chased them off with a trowel and a string of curses learned from his grandmother. The finds were crated and shipped to Stockholm under armed guard. The axe went on display first, under glass in the medieval hall. Crowds queued for hours. Children pressed their noses to the case and whispered that the serpent still moved if you stared long enough. Scholars argued in Latin and Swedish. Was this truly Bjorn Ironside? The sagas placed his death around 880. The ship matched the period. The papal ring was indisputable. But the silk, analyzed under microscope, was dyed with madder and indigo, a luxury only the South could provide. The chalices bore the mark of a Pisan workshop. The vellum was Roman. The hoard was a snapshot of the expedition, frozen in earth. The second season, 1929, focused on the settlement traces around the mound. Geophysical survey, new then, a magnetometer dragged on a sled, revealed anomalies beneath the meadow. They dug test pits and found post holes, hearthstones, a smithy with slag still warm to the touch after 1,000 years. A longhouse foundation, 50 meters long, its walls outlined in charcoal. Inside, more treasures, a bronze balance scale with Roman weights, a glass beaker etched with a Christian cross, a runestone fragment reading, Bjorn Konungur. The rest was illegible, the surface flaked away, but the name was enough. Lindqvist sat in the trench at dusk, pipe cold, and felt the past breathe on his neck. Birka yielded more. The trading town on Björka, 10 kilometers south, had been excavated since the 1870s, but the Uppsala finds prompted a new campaign. In the Black Earth, the merchant quarter, excavators uncovered a layer of burnt grain and melted glass dated to 860. Beneath it, a hoard of 412 coins. The latest a dirham of the Abbasid Caliph al-Musta'in, minted in Samarra. Among them, a single gold solidus of Emperor Michael III, pierced and looped with silver wire. On the reverse, a scratch in runes. Romaborg, Rome City. The merchant who buried it had seen the expedition, or its aftermath. In the harbor, divers found the keel of a nar, wider than a warship built for cargo. Its hold still contained amphorae, their pitch seals intact. When opened, they released a ghost of olive oil and garum, the fish sauce that had fed Roman legions. The labels in Latin read Productum Pisae, Pisan product. The wolf girls left traces too. In the cemetery at Birka, a double grave held 2 women, one with a spearhead between her ribs, the other with a child's skull at her feet. Grave goods, a silver brooch in the shape of a wolf, its eyes garnets, a spindle whorl of jet, a necklace of glass beads alternating blue and white, a pattern known from Lazio. DNA extracted in 2018 confirmed Italian ancestry on the maternal line. The spear was Frankish, the brooch Norse, a warrior and a mother buried together. The runestone above them, half buried in peat. Read Lucia, OK Beatrix, Varg Flockorna, rest here. The stone was raised by their grandchildren, the runes proud and deep. Banny's line was harder to trace, but not impossible. In the churchyard at Sigtuna, founded in 970, a generation after Bjorn, a grave slab bore a hawk in low relief, wings spread, beak open in a scream. Beneath it, in Latin, Johannes Philips Romani, Archer of the North. The stone was reused. The hawk had once been part of a Roman frieze. The man buried beneath it died in 942, old for the time. His skeleton, excavated in 1955, showed healed fractures in the left arm and a trepanation hole in the skull, battle wounds and crude surgery. Beside him, a longbow of yew, its string long-rotted, and a quiver of arrows fletched with goose feathers. The bow was English. The arrows, by their iron points, were forged in Uppsala. A Roman hawk, an English bow, a Swedish smith. The blood of the Frangipani, thinned but unbroken. The eunuch Nikitas left the clearest mark. In the foundations of Birka's first stone church, built 930, demolished 1050, archaeologists found a lead casket no larger than a shoebox. Inside, a vellum codex, 120 pages bound in oak boards, the Gesta Bjorni. The Latin text was complete, the runes fragmentary, the cipher unbroken until 1973, when a linguist at Uppsala University cracked it with a computer. The final page in Nikita's hand read, "I write this in the year of our Lord 895, in the reign of Eric the Victorious, grandson of Bjorn. The king is dead, the hoard buried, the song begun. May the truth outlive the singer." The casket also contained a stylus, a wax tablet with grocery lists in Greek, and a single gold coin, Leo IV again, the same as the plowboy's find. Nikitas had kept it as a bookmark. The axe toured Europe in 1930, Berlin, Paris, London. In Rome, it was displayed in the Vatican museums for one day only, under heavy guard. The curator, a Jesuit named Giovanni Battista Rossi, stared at the serpent inlay and crossed himself. "It is the devil's work," he muttered. Lindqvist, standing beside him, smiled around his pipe. "No, father. It is a king's. The axe returned to Stockholm and has not left since. It rests in a vault, climate-controlled, the serpent still gleaming. Every year on the anniversary of the mound's opening, the museum opens late. Visitors file past in silence. Children still swear the serpent moves. The mound itself is a park now. A gravel path winds to the summit where a bronze plaque reads, Here lay Bjorn Ironside, d. circa 880, who sailed to Rome and brought back its ransom. The ship's outline is marked in stone, the prow facing the lake. In summer, tourists picnic on the grass. In winter, cross-country skiers glide past, their breath white in the cold. The birch trees have grown tall, their roots tangled with the rivets no one bothered to remove. At night, when the moon is full and the lake is glass, locals say you can see a dragon ship on the water, its sail scarlet, its prow cutting the reflection of the stars. They say Bjorn sails still, forever chasing the 7 hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The saga lives in fragments. A runestone in Upland, Bjorn Oke Hasten, Romfararar, Reistu Sten Thessa, Bjorn and Hastin, Romefarers, raised this stone. A charter from the Abbey of Fulda, 912. The pagans who took the Pope's gold. A marginal note in an Icelandic manuscript, Bjorn Ironside came within a day's march of Rome and turned back for love of a woman. The woman is never named. The skalds disagree. Some say she was a shield maiden who died at Gibraltar. Others say she was the Pope's niece, ransomed and sent north. The truth is lost, but the argument keeps the song alive. Modern scholarship is kinder than the sagas. Radiocarbon dates the ship to 870 plus 30. Isotope analysis of the silk places the madder in Anatolia, the indigo in India, trade routes that converged in Pisa. The papal ring is genuine, the vellum authenticated. The axe's silver inlay matches a hoard found in Tuscany, dated 859. The hoard itself, valued in 1928 at 1.2 million kroner, is now priceless. Every piece tells a story. The crushed chalices were hacked apart for portability. The scattered coins were thrown as a gesture, a king's largesse to the gods. The child's sword was a promise. The woman's comb, a memory. The wolf girl's grave was re-excavated in 2018. The DNA confirmed the Italian lineage, but also a surprise. The child buried with them was male, age 3, with a genetic marker common in the Baltic. A grandson, perhaps, born of a union between North and South. The spearhead was removed, conserved, displayed beside the axe. The brooch is worn by the museum director on formal occasions. The necklace beads are strung on modern wire, a teaching aid for school groups. Children hold them and imagine 2 girls with shaved heads learning to throw spears under a northern sky. Vanni's bow was reconstructed in 1965. A master bowyer in Dalarna used yew from the same forest. Fletched arrows with goose feathers dyed red. The draw weight is 110 pounds, lethal at 200 meters. It hangs in the archery hall at Sigtuna, beside a target painted with a papal tiara. Every summer, a tournament is held in Bjorn's name. The prize is a silver arrowhead, modeled on the ones found in the mound. The winner's name is carved on a runestone in the churchyard. Beside Iohannes Philips Romani, Niceda's codex was digitized in 2005. The ciphered pages revealed a diary, the price of barley in 870, the birth of a princess, the day a raven landed on the king's shoulder and spoke in Latin. The final entry, dated 15th of September 895, the king's mound is sealed. The song begins, I go to my rest. The casket is displayed in a glass case, the stylus beside it. Visitors leave flowers, Roman poppies grown from seeds found in the silk. The mound is quiet now. The tourists come and go. The skiers pass in winter. The birch trees whisper in the wind. But the earth remembers. Every rivet, every coin, every thread of scarlet silk is a note in a song that began in 859 and has not ended. Bjorn Ironside, who sailed with 62 ships and came back with 20. Who stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel. Who took Rome's gold and left its soul. Who sleeps under the earth with a dragon at his feet and a serpent at his throat, sailing still in the dreams of the north, forever chasing the 7 hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The river Dnieper was a blade of silver under the midsummer sun of 870, its banks thick with reeds and the drone of horseflies. A fleet of 30 Nars, broad-beamed cargo ships with dragon prows painted in fading scarlet, nosed the current, their sails reefed, their oars biting deep. At the head of the column rode a vessel unlike the others, narrower, faster, its hull patched with Roman oak and its mast stepped in a socket of Tuscan marble. The sail was the last bolt of Pisan silk, its scarlet now the color of dried blood. On the prow stood a man in his 40th year, beard streaked with iron, eyes the pale blue of glacier melt. Eric Bjornsson, Eric the Victorious, though the name was not yet his, gripped the gunwale and tasted the wind. It carried pine and tar and the faint sweet rot of the steppe. Behind him, the cargo holds groaned with the weight of Uppsala's wealth: Arab silver, Frankish iron, Byzantine glass, and a chest sealed with the Pope's ring. Ahead lay the Varangian road, the river route to Miklagard, the great city, Constantinople. The saga had carried Bjorn's name east. Now his son would carry his gold. The journey began in Birka, the trading town on Björkö, where the Baltic spilled into Lake Mälaren. Eric had sailed at dawn, the harbor crowded with Russ's merchants whose beards were braided with gold wire and whose eyes were sharp as falcons. They spoke a tongue that was half Norse, half Slavic, and they knew the stories. Bjorn Ironside took Rome's ransom. Bjorn made the Pope kneel. Bjorn sleeps under the mound with a dragon at his feet. They had come to trade, but also to measure the son against the father. Eric gave them scarlet silk and a torque of hacked gold. In return, they gave him guides, two brothers named Rurik and Cineas, descendants of the Varangians who had first carved a path east a generation earlier. They knew the rapids, the portages, the Khazar tollkeepers who demanded silver for every keel. They knew where the Pechenegs rode and where the Greeks paid in gold for northern steel. The Dnieper was not kind. At the first rapid, Surski, the roaring one, the water boiled white around hidden rocks. Two Nars foundered, their hulls staved in, their crews clinging to barrels until the current dragged them under. Eric ordered the cargo lashed tighter. The oarsmen doubled. They portaged the worst stretches, dragging the ships on rollers of pine greased with walrus fat. The guides sang to keep rhythm, their voices rising over the crash of water. Bjorn sailed south and took the Pope's ring. Eric sails east and takes the Emperor's gold. The song spread from ship to ship, a thread binding the fleet. At night they camped on sandbars, the fires ringed with shields, the sentries watching for steppe riders. Eric walked the perimeter, his sayax at his belt, the Pope's parchment tucked inside his tunic. He read it by firelight, the Latin faded but legible. Leo Episcopus. In perpetuum, forever, he smiled. Forever was a long time for a Viking. Kiev was a sprawl of timber palisades on the high bluffs above the river, its churches newly roofed with lead from the Rhineland. The prince, Askold, a Varangian who had taken the city a decade earlier, greeted them with mead and suspicion. He had heard the tales. He wanted the gold. Eric gave him a chalice from Luna's cathedral, its rim dented by a Viking axe. In return, Askold gave passage and a tithe of slaves, Slavs with shaved heads and iron collars, their eyes dull with resignation. They were loaded into the holds like ballast. Eric did not look at their faces. A king's son learned early that some weights were necessary. South of Kiev, the river widened, the banks giving way to marsh and forest. The guides spoke of the great portage at the Volkhov, where the Dnieper's waters met the Lovat, and from there to Lake Ilmen and the road to Novgorod. But Eric had another destination. At the confluence of the Desna, he turned the fleet east into a narrower channel choked with reeds. The guides protested, Pecheneg territory, Khazar patrols. But Eric's eyes were fixed on a rune-scratched oar blade he had found in Birka's harbor, its message half erased by water. Romaborg to Miklagard, follow the red sail, his father's hand, or a skald's embellishment. It did not matter. The red sail was his now. They reached the dawn at the height of summer, the river slow and brown, its banks alive with bitterns and the stink of mud. Here the Khazars ruled, their fortress at Sarkel a white scar on the steppe. The toll was steep, 10% of the cargo, weighed on scales of bronze. Eric paid in hacked silver and a promise. Tell your Kagan, he said through the guides, that the son of Bjorn Ironside brings gifts for the Emperor. Gifts that will make Khazaria rich. The Kagan, a Jew with a beard like black wool and eyes that had seen too many caravans, laughed and waved them through. The chest with the Pope's ring stayed sealed. The Black Sea was a shock after the rivers. The water was green and deep, the horizon endless. Storms came without warning, waves higher than the mast. One Nar vanished in the night, its lantern snuffed like a candle. The crew sang to keep fear at bay, the same song now. Bjorn took the Pope's gold. Eric takes the Emperor's. They sighted the Crimea at dawn, its mountains purple against the sky. Cherson, the Greek outpost, greeted them with catapults and suspicion. The governor, a eunuch named Patronus, his robes stiff with gold thread, demanded tribute. Eric gave him the last of the Pisan silk and a story. "My father stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel. I come to do the same to your emperor." Patronus laughed until he cried, then loaded the ships with wine and dried figs. "Tell Basil I send a wolf cub," he said. "Let him tame it if he can." Constantinople rose from the water like a dream of marble and fire. The walls, triple-layered, studded with towers, stretched for miles, their gates named in gold. The harbor was a forest of masts, Greek dromons with painted eyes, Arab dhows with lateen sails, Venetian galleys flying the Lion of St. Mark. Eric's fleet beached at the Golden Horn under the eyes of the Varangian Guard, northern giants in scale mail, their axes gleaming, their beards braided with silver rings. They recognized the scarlet sail. They recognized the torque. They recognized the name. The captain, a Swede named Harold Hardrada, though the name was not yet his, clasped Eric's forearm. "Your father's blood runs in you," he said. "The emperor will see it." The audience was in the Chrysotriklinos, the golden hall of the great palace. Basil sat on a throne of ivory and gold, his robes stiff with pearls, his eyes the color of wet ash. Flanking him were the logothete, the city prefect, the patriarch in black robes. Eric entered barefoot, as custom demanded, but with his sayax at his belt and the Pope's parchment in his hand. The hall fell silent. He knelt, not deep, just enough, and spoke in Greek learned from Nikita's codex. "My father took Rome's gold. I bring it to you, Basilius, as a gift and a warning. The North is awake." He opened the chest. The gold spilled across the marble, torques, chalices, the papal ring glinting like a star. Basil's eyes widened. The patriarch crossed himself. Harold Hardrada smiled. The bargain was struck in a side chamber smelling of myrrh and wax. Eric would serve in the Varangian Guard for 3 years, his men with him. In return, the emperor would pay in gold, Byzantine numismata, pure as the sun, and grant trading rights in the city. The chest would stay in Constantinople, its contents melted into icons and crowns. The Pope's ring would hang in Hagia Sophia, a trophy of the North. Eric signed with a rune, Bjornsson, and pressed the Pope's parchment into wax. The saga grew a new verse. The Varangians were a brotherhood of exiles and adventurers. Their barracks in the palace quarter loud with Norse and Slavic and Greek. Eric learned to fight in the Greek style, short sword and round shield. The phalanx a wall of iron. He learned to drink the sweet wine of Chios and to curse in 10 tongues. His men traded scarlet silk for silk from Cathay, walrus ivory for pepper from Malabar. The Wolf Girl's grandchildren, Romano and Freitas, now in their 20s, joined the women's quarters, their spears traded for distaffs, their songs for psalms. Vani's son Leo, hawk-nosed and quiet, became a scribe in the imperial chancery, his Latin flawless, his runes a secret. The years passed in fire and gold. Eric fought in Sicily against the Saracens, his axe cleaving turbans and hope. He guarded the emperor at the hippodrome, the crowd roaring as chariots thundered past. He stood watch in Hagia Sophia as the patriarch hung the Pope's ring on a chain above the altar, its keys catching the light of 1,000 lamps. In the spring of 873, he sailed north. His 3 years done, his purse heavy with numismata, his name carved on the palace walls, Erikr Bjarnarsson, Roma Ferrari, Rome Farer. The scarlet sail was gone, replaced by imperial purple, but the dragon prow remained. He returned to Uppsala in the autumn. The fleet now 40 ships, their holds stuffed with Byzantine silk and Arab glass. The mound had grown grass, the runestone above it weathered but proud. Eric knelt, pressed his forehead to the earth, and whispered to his father. "I took the emperor's gold. I left his soul." He opened the new chest, smaller but heavier, and poured the numismata across the grave. The coins rang like bells. The song grew another verse. The Russ's connection deepened. Novgorod, founded by Rurik's line, became a second Burka, its markets loud with the clash of tongues. The Volga road opened, carrying furs and slaves to Baghdad, bringing back silk and spices. The Khazars fell, their Khaganate crumbling under Pecheneg hooves, but the trade endured. Eric's grandsons sailed the Caspian, their prows painted with the hawk of the Frangipani. They wintered in Ital, summered in Bulgar, their ships low in the water with silver. The saga followed, carried by skalds who had never seen the sea. Eric took the emperor's gold. His sons took the caliphs. Westward, the legend took root in Normandy. In 911, a Viking named Rollo descended, the chroniclers claimed, from Bjorn's bastard line, knelt before Charles the Simple at St. Clair-sur-Epte. The king gave him land, a duke's title, and a Christian bride. Rollo gave him peace. The treaty was sealed with a kiss, but the Normans remembered the saga. In the Abbey of Jumièges, a monk named Dudo wrote the Gesta Normanorum, weaving Bjorn's voyage into Rollo's pedigree. The Pope's ring became a relic, the scarlet sail a banner. The wolf girl's blood ran in the veins of William the Bastard, who would sail to England in 1066 with a fleet of dragon ships and a claim to a throne. In England, the great heathen army had broken at Edington in 878, but the memory lingered. Alfred's chroniclers wrote of Ivar the Boneless and his brothers, of the blood eagle carved on King Ella. They did not mention Bjorn, but the Skalds did. In York, a runestone raised by a merchant read, Bjorn OK Ivar, Romaborg OK England, Rome in England. The stone was smashed by Christian zealots in 1100, but fragments survive in the Jorvik Museum. The runes still proud. The saga flowered in the courts of Canute the Great. In 1016, the Danish king sat on the throne of England, his empire stretching from the Skagerrak to the Thames. His skalds sang of Bjorn at the feast of his coronation, the hall at Winchester loud with mead and Latin. The song was old now, its verses polished by 100 voices. Bjorn took the Pope's gold. Eric took the emperor's. Canute takes the world. The king laughed and gave the skald a torque of hacked silver. The Pope's ring, melted centuries earlier, became a chalice in Canterbury Cathedral, its keys hidden in the gold. The song crossed the Atlantic in the holds of Leif Eriksson's Nars. In Vinland, the skalds sang to the Skraelings, their voices rising over the cod-drying racks. Bjorn sailed south and took the Pope's ring. Leif sails west and takes the sunrise. The natives listened, their eyes wide, and traded furs for iron nails. The saga grew another verse, its scarlet sail now green with American vines. In Rome, the memory was a scar. The Vatican archives hold a bull of John VIII, dated 879. Let the northern wolves be excommunicated, who dared lay hands on the fisherman's ring. The ring was gone, but the curse lingered. In the catacombs, a fresco shows a Viking with an axe, his beard braided with iron, his eyes pale as ice. The inscription reads, Barbari ex Aquilone, barbarians from the north. The fresco was whitewashed in the Renaissance, but the outline remains, a ghost in the dark. The song is quiet now. The ships are dust, the gold spent, the silk rotted, but the echo remains. In Uppsala, the mound is a park, the runestone a tourist stop. In Constantinople, the Varangian Guard is a memory, their barracks a ruin. In Normandy, the Duke's castle is a museum, the hawk banner faded. In England, the chalice is locked in a vault, its keys a secret. But in the long nights of the north, when the auroras dance and the wind howls through the fjords, the skalds still sing. They sing of Bjorn Ironside, who sailed with 62 ships and came back with 20, who stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel, who took Rome's gold and left its soul, who sleeps under the earth with a dragon at his feet and a serpent at his throat, sailing still in the dreams of the north, forever chasing the 7 hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The hall at Reykjaholt smelled of tallow, wet wool, and the sour breath of too many men in too small a space. It was the winter of 1226, and the wind off the North Atlantic hammered the turf roof like Thor's own fists. Inside, the fire in the long hearth spat sparks that died before they touched the packed earth floor. At the high seat, carved from driftwood, its arms worn smooth by generations of chieftains, sat Snorri Sturluson, 47 winters old, his beard more gray than gold, his eyes sharp as a raven's despite the gout that swelled his left foot. Before him, on a table of whalebone, lay a stack of vellum sheets, the ink still wet on the last page. Beside it, a cup of imported Rhenish wine, half empty, and a runestone the size of a man's head, its surface chipped, but the runes legible. Bjorn Konungur, OK Hasten, Rumfararar, Reistu Stenthessa. The stone had come from upland, carried west by a merchant who swore it was the last of its kind. Snorri had paid in walrus ivory and a promise of protection. The promise was worth more than the ivory. Across from him sat the skald, the last living thread to the saga's heart. His name was Halvard the Horse, 93 winters if he was a day, his voice a rasp like dry leaves on stone. He had been a boy of 12 when Eric the Victorious returned from Miklagard, a page in the hall at Uppsala, close enough to smell the emperor's wine on the king's breath. He had heard the song from the men who had sailed with Bjorn, Hastein's coffin, the Pope's ring, the dragon ships burning at Gibraltar. He had sung it himself, in halls from Birka to Bergen, until his voice cracked and the words became memory. Now he sat wrapped in a bearskin, his hands trembling as he lifted a horn of small beer. The hall was quiet but for the wind and the crackle of the fire. The other guests, Snorri's sons, his lawmen, a priest from Skalholt, leaned forward, their shadows long on the turf walls. "Begin with the ships," Snorri said, his quill poised. 62 at the Loire, 20 at the return. "I want the count exact," Halvard coughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. 62, he rasped. "I counted them myself, boy that I was, standing on the jetty at Noirmoutier. Dragon prows, scarlet sails, the oars flashing like wings. Bjorn's ship was the Ormren Langi, the Long Serpent, though the name came later. His banner was a raven, black on red, the wings spread wide. Hastings was a wolf, gray on white. They sailed south in the spring of 859, the sea flat as glass, the gulls screaming like the dead." Snorri wrote, the quill scratching. The priest muttered a prayer, the lawman poured more wine. Halvard's eyes, milky with age, fixed on the runestone. "They wintered in the Camargue, the marshland south of Arles. I heard it from Ubba the bear, who lost 3 fingers to a Saracen arrow. They hunted flamingos for the pot, their feathers pink as a maiden's blush. In the spring they sailed east, past the Balearics, past Sardinia, the storms chasing them like wolves. At Luna they played the trick. Hastein in the coffin, the bishop's blood on the altar. I saw the mitre myself years later in Uppsala, the pearls black with age, the gold tarnished. Bjorn wore it once at a feast and laughed until the mead ran from his beard. The fire settled, sending up a shower of sparks. Snorri's son Thorstein, 16 and eager, leaned closer. "And Rome? Did they truly stand in St. Peter's?" Halvard's laugh was a wheeze. "Not Rome. Luna. But the song made it Rome, and who is to say the song lies? They took the ransom, 10,000 pounds of gold, they said, though I wager it was less. The Pope's parchment was real. I held it once in Eric's hall. The wax was cracked, the ink faded, but the words were there. Leo Episcopus, in perpetuum, forever." Bjorn tucked it in his belt and said, "Forever is a long time for a dead man." Snorri's quill paused. "And the return?" 20 ships, Halvard said. "The rest lost to storms, to Greek fire, to the Saracens at the pillars. They burned like torches, the men screaming as the pitch caught. Bjorn hacked his way through the borders, his axe singing, but the sea took its due. They beached at the Loire in the spring of 862, the survivors thin as wraiths, their eyes full of ghosts. The plunder bought a kingdom. The song bought loyalty. Eric was born that winter, in the high seat's shadow, his first cry loud enough to wake the dead. The priest crossed himself. Snorri ignored him. The mound? Halvard's hands stilled. I was there, 20 winters later, when the fever took Bjorn. The ship was old, patched with Roman oak, its sail the last of the scarlet silk. They laid him in the prow, the axe across his chest, the Pope's parchment in his belt. The torque was gold, melted from the ring. The coins were scattered like seed, Arab, Frankish, Byzantine, papal. The wolf girls stood at the head, their hair white as snow. Vani held the torch. Nikitas read the runes. The flames rose high, the smoke black against the stars. The mound was sealed with earth and stone, the runestone raised the next spring. I carved the last line myself. Sail on, Ironside. Silence fell, broken only by the wind. Snorri's quill moved again, the words flowing onto the vellum. The Heimskringla, he called it, the circle of the world. But this was the saga of Bjorn Ironside, the heart of the circle, the song fixed forever. He wrote of the ships, the trick at Luna, the ransom, the return. He wrote of Eric in Miklagard, of the wolf girl's graves, of Vani's hawk. He wrote of the mound, the axe, the serpent. When Halvard's voice failed, Snorri filled the gaps with the runestones, the chronicles, the fragments of Nikita's codex. The priest protested. Pagan lies, he called them, but Snorri silenced him with a look. The song is older than your god, he said, and stronger. Halvard died that winter, in the guest bed at Reykjaholt, his bearskin pulled to his chin. Snorri buried him in the churchyard, a runestone above his head. Halvard R. Skald, Bjorn Saga, rest here. The saga was finished by spring, the vellum bound in oak, the runes carved deep. Snorri read it aloud at the Althing, his voice carrying over the law rock, the chieftains listening in silence. The song was fixed now, no longer breath but stone, no longer memory but truth. The manuscript traveled to Norway, to Denmark, to the Orkneys. Copies were made, the runes translated into Latin, the Latin into the vernacular. In the scriptorium, at Thingvellir, a monk named Gunnlaugur added marginal notes. The scarlet sail was seen off Greenland in 1261. In the Abbey of Melrose, a Scottish scribe wrote, "The Pope's ring is in Canterbury," or so they say. In the Vatican, a cardinal read the Gesta Bjorni and crossed himself. The song was everywhere and nowhere, a thread woven into the tapestry of the North. The mound slept, the ships rotted, the gold was spent, but the song endured. In the long nights of the North, when the auroras danced and the wind howled through the fjords, the skalds still sang. They sang of Bjorn Ironside, who sailed with 62 ships and came back with 20, who stood in St. Peter's and made the Pope kneel, who took Rome's gold and left its soul, who sleeps under the earth with a dragon at his feet and a serpent at his throat, sailing still in the dreams of the North, forever chasing the seven hills that slipped through his fingers like water, like glory, like time. The rivet lay in a velvet-lined drawer in the basement of the Swedish History Museum, catalog number SHM 1928-47, 112. It was no longer than a man's thumb, iron gone the color of dried blood, its clenched head flattened by 1,000 years of pressure. A paper tag, yellowed and curling, bore the inscription in Sune Lindqvist's meticulous hand, Ormrin Langi, stern rivet, starboard side, third strake below sheer. Nothing else, no flourish, no saga. Just the quiet fact of a nail that once held a dragon ship together. On the morning of 14th of March 2019, Dr. Astrid Lindström, senior curator of the Viking department, carried the drawer up 3 flights of stairs to the conservation lab. The rivet was scheduled for non-invasive X-ray fluorescence, a routine check. Before the new exhibition, Bjorn Ironside, Myth, Metal, Memory, Astrid set the drawer on the steel table, snapped on nitrile gloves, and felt the old shiver. The same one her grandfather Sune had described in his 1928 field notes. The past breathing on your neck. The lab smelled of ethanol and ozone. The technician, a PhD student named Lucas, adjusted the XRF gun and fired a beam of X-rays at the rivet's clenched head. The screen bloomed with peaks and valleys. Iron, of course. Traces of copper from the Roman nails melted down in Uppsala's smithy. A whisper of silver from the inlay of Bjorn's axe, carried on a smith's hammer and transferred to the iron. And then, unexpected, a spike of lead. Lucas frowned. That's not right for a ship rivet. Astrid leaned closer. Lead meant ballast or solder or, her pulse quickened, papal bullae, the soft lead seals that hung from medieval documents. She cross-referenced the 1928 inventory. Rivet 112 had been found wedged between 2 strakes, wrapped in a shred of scarlet silk no larger than a postage stamp. The silk had disintegrated in the 1940s, but the lead had not. Lucas isolated the isotope signature, Pb2Du7, Pb206, ratio 0. 84, Roman, pre-800 CE. The same ratio as the lead seal on Leo IV's parchment. Astrid's grandfather had never seen the parchment. It had crumbled to dust in the mound's acidic soil, but the rivet had carried a ghost of it south, then north, then into the earth. She photographed the spectrum, emailed it to the Vatican, and waited. 3 days later, a reply came from the Archivio Apostolico, confirmed. Identical to Bulla of Leo IV, 847-855. Congratulations. The rivet, silent for 11 centuries, had just spoken. The exhibition opened on 21st June 2019, Midsummer Eve. The museum's Great Hall was transformed into a fjord of light and shadow. 62 ship rivets, replicas cast in bronze, hung from the ceiling on invisible wires, forming the ghostly outline of the Ormrin Langi. At the center, under a spotlight, the original rivet rested in a cube of museum glass, the lead spike glowing on an adjacent screen. Visitors moved through in silence, the way people do in churches. A child asked if the ship would sail again. Astrid, guiding the tour, smiled. It never stopped. The revival had begun long before the rivet spoke. In 1807, Napoleon's army occupied Rome. A young Swedish lieutenant named Carl Gustaf Löwenhielm, attached to the French staff as an observer, wandered the Vatican museums during the looting. He found a fragment of vellum in a crate marked for Paris, Bjorn's Ironside, Romam. The rest was illegible. Löwenhielm smuggled it out in his boot, carried it north through the snows, and deposited it in the Royal Library in Stockholm. The fragment, now known as Codex Upsaliensis C233, was the first physical proof that the saga had reached Latin ears. Romantic poets seized it. Esaias Tegnér, bishop and bard, wove Bjorn into his Frithiof's saga, 1825, turning the Viking king into a Byronic hero who loved a pope's niece and died of a broken heart. Schoolboys memorized the verses. Painters rendered the coffin trick in oils the size of barn doors. The scarlet sail became the flag of Swedish nationalism. In 1846, the Danish archaeologist J.J.A. Wersai dug at Birka and found the first Arab dirham stamped with a hole for suspension. He wrote to Stockholm, "The Rome-farers were real. The letter sparked a race. Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian teams fanned across Uppland, turning barrows with steam shovels and dynamite. Most found nothing but sheep bones. But in 1872, Hjalmar Stolpe uncovered the black earth at Birka and the hoard with the Romaborg solidus. The newspapers screamed, 'Viking Rome raid confirmed.' Queen Victoria sent a telegram of congratulations. The rivet was still 56 years in the earth. The 20th century brought science. In 1934, the Swedish chemist Arne Westgren analyzed the axe's silver inlay and matched it to Tuscan ore. In 1951, radiocarbon dates from the mound's charcoal pinned the burial to 875 plus 35. In 1973, the Nikita's cipher was cracked. Each discovery peeled back a layer of saga, revealing the man beneath. By the 1980s, school textbooks listed Bjorn, alongside Charlemagne and Alfred, kings who shaped Europe with steel and gold. The rivet waited. The 21st century brought the world to the rivet. In 2005, a BBC documentary crew filmed the axe under infrared. The serpent's eyes glowed faintly, phosphorus from the silver. In 2012, a metal detecting club in Tuscany found a hoard of 23 Viking coins, including one papal piece, buried beneath an olive tree. The farmer who owned the land named his vineyard Ironside. In 2017, a DNA study of the Wolf Girl's grave confirmed 38% Italian ancestry, 62% Scandinavian. The results made the front page of La Repubblica, Le Figli di Roma nel Nord. Astrid's XRF spike was the final note. The exhibition ran for 6 months. 2 million visitors. A 9-year-old girl from Malmö left a drawing at the rivet's case. A dragon ship with a scarlet sail. A stick-figure king waving from the prow. Astrid pinned it to the staff bulletin board. On the last night, the museum stayed open until midnight. At 23:57, the lights dimmed to a single spotlight on the rivet. A recording of Hallvard's song, reconstructed from Snorri's text, sung in Old Norse by a choir from Reykjavik, filled the hall. The final line lingered. "Sail on, Ironside." The spotlight faded to black. Outside, the midsummer sky was the color of glacier ice. Tourists lingered on the steps, unwilling to leave. A busker played a hurdy-gurdy, the drone like distant oars. Astrid locked the doors, the rivet safe in its vault. She walked home along the water, the city's lights shivering on the surface of Riddarfjorden. Somewhere beneath the modern streets, the buried keels of Birka's harbor slept under silt and stone. Somewhere beneath the grass of Kungshogen, the Ormrin Langi waited, its rivets still clenched. Somewhere in the dark between stars, a scarlet sail caught a wind no compass could find. The song was quiet now, but not dead. It lived in the rivet's lead spike, in the wolf girl's DNA, in the faded ink of a pope's curse. It lived in the dreams of children who would never see a longship, in the code of programmers who named their startup Ironside AI, in the tattoo on a sailor's arm in Reykjavik, "Sail On." The Seven Hills were long conquered by tourists and traffic, but the north wind still carried the echo of a dragon prow cutting the clouds. Astrid reached her apartment, poured a glass of aquavit, and raised it to the night. "Skål, Bjorn," she whispered. "You nearly won!" The rivet slept. The song sailed on. The frost clung to the gravel path like a shroud as Astrid Lindstrom crested the final rise of Kungshögen on the morning of November 4th, 2025. Lake Mälaren lay below, a sheet of hammered steel under the low November sun, its surface unbroken save for the black silhouette of a lone swan slicing south. The mound rose 20 meters wide at its base, 5 meters to the crown, its flanks a quilt of frost-laced grass and stubborn heather. Birch trees ringed the summit, their branches etched bare against the slate sky. No tourists today, no school groups with clipboards, no influencers posing with selfie sticks. Just the wind, sharp as a sayax, and the weight of the wooden box in Astrid's gloved hands. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue, lay SHM, 1928, 471112, the rivet. Iron the color of old blood, clenched head scarred by Lindqvist's trowel 97 years ago. The lead spike within it, confirmed by Vatican spectrography, carried the ghost of Leo IV's bulla. It was coming home. The ceremony was small, as these things should be. A county archaeologist named Thomas, his beard frosted at the tips. A runologist from Uppsala University, her notebook open to a fresh page. 2 representatives from the Eckerö Historical Society, clutching thermoses of coffee laced with aquavit, and a Sami elder invited to bless the reburial, his drum a low thunder under the wind. No press. The Swedish Heritage Board had ruled it a private repatriation, citing cultural sensitivity and the mound's protected status. Astrid had argued for months in smoke-filled boardrooms. The rivet belonged to the earth that birthed it, to the dragon ship that carried Bjorn's bones, to the saga that refused to die. They relented in October, after the rivet's XRF data went viral on academic Twitter. Chew Ironside returns trending for 12 hours. The box was hers to carry. They gathered at the crown, where the fragmented runestone U13 jutted from the turf like a broken tooth. "Bjorn, Romfarari," the runes whispered, the rest eroded by a millennium of rain. Thomas unfolded a tarp, weighted with stones. Astrid knelt, the frost crunching under her knees, and opened the box. The rivet gleamed dully in the pale light, its clenched form unchanged since 1928. She held it aloft, letting the group see the iron that had held the Ormrin Langi together through storms off Sardinia, Greek fire at Gibraltar, the long haul north to the Loire. "From the third strake below the sheer," she said, voice steady. "Starboard side." It pinned the oak from Pisa, the pine from Upland. It carried the scarlet silk, the lead from the Pope's seal. "Bjorn's ship," the runologist murmured approval, sketching the rivet beside the stone's runes. The Sami elder began his Yoiki, a wordless chant rising and falling, invoking the ancestors, the lake spirits, the wind that carried dragon sails. Thomas dug the hole, 30 centimeters deep, lined with fresh birch bark stripped that morning. Astrid placed the rivet at the bottom, nestling it beside a replica rivet for company, one cast in bronze from the museum's 3D scan. Over it, a layer of soil from the original trench, saved by Lindqvist in a jam jar labeled Kungshögen Prime. Then the tarp was folded back, the earth patted smooth, a flat stone laid atop like a rune. No marker. Let it sleep unknown, as it had for centuries. They drank from the thermoses, the aquavit burning warm against the cold. Thomas raised his cup. To Bjorn, who nearly won. Astrid echoed it, her eyes on the lake. Somewhere beneath the surface, the silt held echoes. Keels from Birka's harbor, a Durham from Samara, the ghost of a Nar that carried Russ's furs east. The mound thrummed now, complete. One rivet returned, the circle closed, word spread quietly. By noon, a thread on Reddit's Viking archaeology had photos of the stone, anonymous, but Astrid recognized Thomas's boot print. Rivet repatriated to Kungshogen today, the poster wrote. No fanfare, just right. Comments flooded. Finally, Bjorn sails home. What's next, the axe? The museum updated its website by evening. SHM 1928-47-112, return to origin. Legacy endures. A 3D scan of the rivet, downloadable, went viral among reenactors. In Oslo, a shipwright incorporated its profile into a new longship build. In Rome, a Vatican curator tweeted a papal coin replica. Restitutio in integrum. Modern Scandinavia wears Bjorn like a torque. In Sweden, the Viking route from Birka to Sigtuna is a UNESCO trail, lined with apps that narrate the saga in AR. Hastein rising from his coffin, dragon prows cresting digital waves. Schoolchildren in Ekero learn the runes of U13 by heart, reciting Rumferrari like a prayer. Denmark claims Hastein as their own, his coffin trick, reenacted yearly at Roskilde, with tourists cheering from the docks. Norway's Varangengard Festival in Trondheim features Eric's purple sail, Byzantine gold raining from catapults. Even the Sami weave him in, yokes invoking the southern wind that brought silk and spears. Ethics shadow the glory. Repatriation debates rage in academic journals. Should the axe follow? The chalices? Nikita's codex fragments? Indigenous voices, from Sami to the Wolf Girl's Italian descendants, demand consultation. A 2024 petition from Lazio historians calls for Southern echoes returned, the Pisan silk threads, the Tuscan silver. Astrid testified before the Riksdag in September. Bjorn was a bridge. North took from South, South lives in North. The rivet proves it. The board agreed. Loans, not gifts. The axe tours Rome in 2027. Globally, Bjorn shapes the North's brand. Netflix greenlit Ironside, the near conquest in 2025, starring a Swedish rap artist as Bjorn, Hastein as a sly Danish comic. The trailer, 62 ships bursting from fjords, the Luna gates creaking open, hit 50 million views. Airlines paint dragon prows on fuselages. Craft breweries sell Pope's Ransom Ale, golden with a papal seal. In gaming, Assassin's Creed Valhalla DLC adds the Luna Raid, players wielding the Ironside axe. Tattoos proliferate, the rivet's clenched fist, the scarlet sail, Rumferrari in blackwork. Yet the mound remains quiet. Winter deepened that November. Snow blanketed the crown, burying the new stone. Locals skied past, nodding to the birches. Children sledded the flanks, whispering of dragons beneath. Astrid visited weekly, her thermos steaming, tracing U13 with a mittened finger. The wind carried no answers, only echoes. The lap of Mellerin, the cry of the swan, the faint clink of iron in the earth. One night in December, under auroras that pulsed green fire, she dreamed. 62 ships ghosted from the mist, sails scarlet as blood. Bjorn at the prow, beard braided with rings, eyes pale as ice. He raised his axe, the serpent inlay gleaming. Nearly won, he said, voice like grinding flows. The lead spike flashed in his palm, Leo's bulla, whole now. The ships beached silent, the rivets unclenching one by one, spilling horde across the snow. Torques, chalices, silk bolts unrotted. Hastein grinned from his coffin ship. The wolf girls threw spears that turned to stars. Vani loosed arrows that pierced the aurora. Nikitas read runes that wrote themselves in fire. Astrid woke with frost on the window, the dream clinging like dew. She dressed, drove to the mound through virgin snow. The stone was uncovered, snow brushed clean by wind. Beneath it, the earth gaped. A foxhole? No, 30 centimeters deep, the replica rivet gleamed beside an empty hollow. The original was gone, taken by thaw or thief or time. She knelt, breath clouding, and laughed. A short, sharp bark like Bjorn's in the sagas. The frost clung to the gravel path like a shroud as Astrid Lindstrom crested the final rise of Kungshogen on the morning of November 4th, 2025. Lake Mälaren lay below, a sheet of hammered steel under the low November sun. Its surface unbroken save for the black silhouette of a lone swan slicing south. The mound rose 20 meters wide at its base, 5 meters to the crown, its flanks a quilt of frost-laced grass and stubborn heather. Birch trees ringed the summit, their branches etched bare against the slate sky. No tourists today, no school groups with clipboards, no influencers posing with selfie sticks. Just the wind, sharp as a say-axe, and the weight of the wooden box in Astrid's gloved hands. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue, lay SHM 1928-47-112, the rivet. iron the color of old blood, clenched head scarred by Lindqvist's trowel 97 years ago. The lead spike within it, confirmed by Vatican spectrography, carried the ghost of Leo IV's bulla. It was coming home. The ceremony was small, as these things should be. A county archaeologist named Thomas, his beard frosted at the tips. A runologist from Uppsala University, her notebook open to a fresh page. 2 representatives from the Eckerö Historical Society, clutching thermoses of coffee laced with aquavit. And a Sami elder invited to bless the reburial, his drum a low thunder under the wind. No press. The Swedish Heritage Board had ruled it a private repatriation, citing cultural sensitivity and the mound's protected status. Astrid had argued for months in smoke-filled boardrooms. The rivet belonged to the earth that birthed it, to the dragon ship that carried Bjorn's bones, to the saga that refused to die. They relented in October, after the rivet's XRF data went viral on academic Twitter. Ironside returns trending for 12 hours. The box was hers to carry. They gathered at the crown, where the fragmented runestone U13 jutted from the turf like a broken tooth. Björn, Romfarari, the runes whispered, the rest eroded by a millennium of rain. Thomas unfolded a tarp, weighted with stones. Astrid knelt, the frost crunching under her knees, and opened the box. The rivet gleamed dully in the pale light, its clenched form unchanged since 1928. She held it aloft, letting the group see the iron that had held the Ormran Langi together through storms off Sardinia, Greek fire at Gibraltar, the long haul north to the Loire. From the third strake below the sheer, she said, voice steady. Starboard side. It pinned the oak from Pisa, the pine from Upland. It carried the scarlet silk, the lead from the Pope's seal. Bjorn's ship. The runologist murmured approval, sketching the rivet beside the stone's runes. The Sami elder began his yoke, a wordless chant rising and falling, invoking the ancestors, the lake spirits, the wind that carried dragon sails. Thomas dug the hole, 30 centimeters deep, lined with fresh birch bark stripped that morning. Astrid placed the rivet at the bottom, nestling it beside a replica rivet for company, one cast in bronze from the museum's 3D scan. Over it, a layer of soil from the original trench, saved by Lindqvist in a jam jar labeled Kungshagen Prime. Then the tarp was folded back, the earth padded smooth, a flat stone laid atop like a rune. No marker. Let it sleep unknown, as it had for centuries. They drank from the thermoses, the aquavit burning warm against the cold. Thomas raised his cup. To Bjorn, who nearly won. Astrid echoed it, her eyes on the lake. Somewhere beneath the surface, the silt held echoes, keels from Birka's harbor, a dirham from Samara, the ghost of a gnar that carried Russ's furs east. The mound thrummed now, complete. One rivet returned, the circle closed, word spread quietly. By noon, a thread on Reddit's RR Viking Archaeology had photos of the stone, anonymous, but Astrid recognized Thomas's boot print. Rivet repatriated to Kungshagen today, the poster wrote. No fanfare, just right. Comments flooded. Finally, Bjorn sails home. What's next, the axe? The museum updated its website by evening. SHM 1928-47-112, returned to origin. Legacy endures. A 3D scan of the rivet, downloadable, went viral among reenactors. In Oslo, a shipwright incorporated its profile into a new longship build. In Rome, a Vatican curator tweeted a papal coin replica, Restitutio in Integrum. Modern Scandinavia wears Bjorn like a torque. In Sweden, the Viking route from Birka to Sigtuna is a UNESCO trail, lined with apps that narrate the saga in AR. Hastein rising from his coffin, dragon prows cresting digital waves. Schoolchildren in Eckerö learn the runes of U13 by heart, reciting Romfarari like a prayer. Denmark claims Hastein as their own, his coffin trick reenacted yearly at Roskilde with tourists cheering from the docks. Norway's Varangian Guard Festival in Trondheim features Eric's purple sail, Byzantine gold raining from catapults. Even the Sami weave him in, yokes invoking the southern wind that brought silk and spears. Ethics shadow the glory. Repatriation debates rage in academic journals. Should the axe follow? The chalices? Nikita's Codex fragments? Indigenous voices, from Sami to the Wolf Girls' Italian descendants, demand consultation. A 2024 petition from Lazio, historians calls for southern echoes returned. The Pisan silk threads, the Tuscan silver. Astrid testified before the Riksdag in September. Bjorn was a bridge. North took from South, South lives in North. The rivet proves it. The board agreed. Loans, not gifts. The Axe tours Rome in 2027. Globally, Bjorn shapes the North's brand. Netflix greenlit Ironside, The Near Conquest in 2025, starring a Swedish rap artist as Bjorn, Haystein as a sly Danish comic. The trailer, 62 ships bursting from fjords, the Luna gates creaking open, hit 50 million views. Airlines paint dragon prows on fuselages. Craft breweries sell Pope's Ransom Ale, golden with a papal seal. In gaming, Assassin's Creed Valhalla DLC adds the Luna Raid, players wielding the Ironside axe. Tattoos proliferate, the rivet's clenched fist, the scarlet sail, Romferrari and blackwork. Yet the mound remains quiet. Winter deepened that November. Snow blanketed the crown, burying the new stone. Locals skied past, nodding to the birches. Children sledded the flanks, whispering of dragons beneath. Astrid visited weekly, her thermos steaming, tracing U13 with a mittened finger. The wind carried no answers, only echoes. The lap of Melaren, the cry of the swan, the faint clink of iron in the earth. One night in December, under auroras that pulsed green fire, she dreamed. 62 ships ghosted from the mist, sails scarlet as blood. Bjorn at the prow, beard braided with rings, eyes pale as ice. He raised his axe, the serpent inlay gleaming. "Nearly won," he said, voice like grinding flows. The lead spike flashed in his palm, Leo's bulla whole now. The ships beached, silent, the rivets unclenching one by one, spilling horde across the snow, torques, chalices, silk bolts unrotted. Haystein grinned from his coffin ship. The wolf girls threw spears that turned to stars. Vani loosed arrows that pierced the aurora. Nikita's read runes that wrote themselves in fire. Astrid woke with frost on the window, the dream clinging like dew. She dressed, drove to the mound through virgin snow. The stone was uncovered, snow brushed clean by wind. Beneath it, the earth gaped, a foxhole. No, 30 centimeters deep, the replica rivet gleamed beside an empty hollow. The original was gone, taken by thaw or thief or time. She knelt, breath clouding, and laughed, a short, sharp bark like Bjorn's in the sagas. The rivet had sailed again. She did not report it. Let it wander as Vikings did. Perhaps to a collector's vault in Tokyo, a smithy in Burka's shadow, a child's pocket in Ekiro. Perhaps back to the sea, clenched in a new ship's strake. The mound closed over the hole, grass knitting seamless. Astrid raised her thermos. "Skull, Ironside, you won after all." The auroras danced. The lake whispered. The dragon slept, but its rivet roamed, forever chasing the seven hills, the open sea, the next horizon. The saga ended not in earth, but in wind. Sail on. The deck of the Ormrind Langi thrummed beneath Bjorn Ironside's boots, the pine planks still warm from the Mediterranean sun, though the night was cold and the stars sharp as spear points. 62 dragon prows ghosted behind him, their scarlet sails reefed, their oars muffled in felt. The year was 859, the hour just past matins, the sea a black mirror reflecting the moon like a silver coin. Luna's walls rose ahead, white marble veined with shadow, the cathedral spire a needle against the sky. Bjorn stood at the prow, one hand on the dragon's neck, the other gripping the axe whose serpent inlay caught the moonlight and threw it back in shards. His beard was braided with iron rings that clinked softly in the wind. His eyes, pale as glacier melt, fixed on the city that was not Rome, but would have to do. Behind him, Haystein stirred in the coffin litter, his corpse pale with ash and fever sweat. The wolf girls, Lucia and Beatrice, scalps freshly shorn, knelt in borrowed monks' robes, their spears hidden beneath prayer beads. Vani, hawk-nosed and silent, held the reliquary with its splinter of the true cross. Nikita's, tongue stilled but mind sharp, clutched the Pope's parchment yet to be written. The fleet was a single breath held across 62 hulls. The plan was simple: open the gates with mercy, take the city with steel. The saga was already writing itself in the salt wind. Centuries collapsed. The scene shimmered, and the deck was suddenly the mound at Kungshogen, 880 CE. Bjorn lay in the prow, scarlet silk his shroud, the axe across his chest. The rivet, SHM 1928-47-112, clenched the third strake, the lead spike within it glowing faintly with Leo's bulla. The wolf girls stood vigil, their hair white now, their spears traded for distaffs. Vani held the torch. Nikitas read the runes. The flames rose, the smoke black against the stars. The mound sealed. The rivet slept, another shimmer. 1226 Reykjaholt. Snorri's quill scratched vellum. Halvard's rasp filling the hall. 62 ships. 20 returned. The runestone U-13 leaned in the corner. Rumferari carved deep. The song fixed in ink, no longer breath, but stone. Shimmer, 1928. Lindqvist's trowel struck the rivet, the clenched iron ringing like a bell. The dragon ship outlined in negative, the horde spilling gold. The axe lifted, serpent gleaming. The world gasped. Shimmer. 2019. Astrid's XRF gun fired, the lead spike blooming on the screen. Ironside returns, the rivet in its glass cube, the scarlet sail in AR above the fjord. Shimmer. 2025. The mound at dawn, frost on the grass. Astrid's box, the rivet returned. The hole beneath the stone, the replica left behind. The original gone, sailing again. Now the deck was all times at once. Bjorn stood at the prow, but the prow was the mound, the exhibition hall, the Reddit thread, the tattoo on a sailor's arm. The 62 ships were rivets hanging from the ceiling, bronze replicas glinting. The scarlet sail was the Aurora's, the Netflix trailer, the airline fuselage. Haystein rose from his coffin, but the coffin was Halvard's deathbed, Snorri's vellum, Lindqvist's jam jar of soil. The wolf girls threw spears that turned to stars, to DNA helices, to the garland of poppies on the museum director's brooch. Vani loosed arrows that pierced the Vatican's tweet, the farmer's vineyard in Tuscany, the child's drawing pinned to the bulletin board. Nikitas read runes that wrote themselves in code, in 3D scans, in the wind off Mälaren. Bjorn raised the axe. The serpent inlay flashed, not silver, but every light that had ever touched it. Luna's torches, Uppsala's hearth, Lindqvist's flashlight, Astrid's spotlight, the auroras of 2025. The lead spike in the rivet pulsed. Leo's bulla hole now, the parchment uncrumbled. The 7 hills rose on the horizon, but they were not Rome. They were Kungshogen, Birka's harbor, the server farms of Stockholm running Assassin's Creed, the child's sled marks on the snow. The gates of Luna opened, but the gates were the museum doors at midnight. The foxhole beneath the stone, the clenched fist of the rivet wherever it sailed now. He spoke, and his voice was every voice that had ever told the saga. Halvard's rasp, Snorri's quill, Lindqvist's field notes, Astrid's toast, the yoik of the Sami elder, the Netflix narrator, the Reddit poster, the child whispering to the swan on the lake. I challenged Rome, he said. I nearly won. The axe fell. Not on flesh, but on time. The blade struck the rivet and the clenched iron rang, a bell across centuries. The sound was the Loire in 862, the Dnieper in 870, the Thames in 1016, the XRF gun in 2019, the frost crunching under Astrid's knees in 2025. The 62 ships became one ship. The Ormrin Langi, its hull every longship that ever sailed. Its sail every scarlet thread from Pisa to Reykjavik. The hoard spilled, not gold, but memory. The Pope's ring melted into torque. The wolf girl's brooch, Vani's bow, Nikita's cipher. The Durham with Romaborg, the child's drawing. The tattoo, the airline paint, the code. The 7 hills crumbled into lake silt, into server coolant, into the quiet earth of the mound. The gates of Luna closed, but they were the museum vault, the foxhole, the circle of birch trees. Bjorn lowered the axe. The serpent slept. The rivet, wherever it was, clenched tight. The deck dissolved. The mound stood alone under the auroras, the stone unmarked, the grass seamless. The swan on the lake cried once, a sound like a dragon's breath. The wind carried no ships, no sails, no songs, only the faint clink of iron in the earth. The lead spike glowing faintly, the saga complete. Bjorn Ironside sailed no more. He had won. The circle closed. The dragon slept. The rivet held.